Thank you, Martin. Good afternoon. It's 2 minutes past 3. I'm Sophia Wensler in the GB newsroom. Your top story this hour. The Prime Minister has refused to describe Lee Anderson's comments as Islamophobic after he said this morning that they were unacceptable and wrong. The former Tory Deputy Chairman released a statement this morning aimed at clarifying remarks he made on this network when he suggested that Islamists had got control of the Mayor of London. Admitting his words were clumsy, he said that he was intending to highlight what he believes is Mr Khan's failure to tackle pro-Palestine protests. Writing in the Evening Standard today, the London Mayor described the comments as vile, racist, anti-Muslim and Islamophobic. Meanwhile, the leader of the Labour Party says the Prime Minister should call it out for what it is.
It's Islamophobia, and the Prime Minister should call it out for what it is. The reason he won't is because he's so weak. They're divided, they're chaotic, and if they're re-elected, we're going to have 5 more years of this. It is only Labour now that can unite the country, bring people together, turn a page on this and actually usher in the sort of society, the sort of future that people desperately want. But the Prime Minister lacks the strength. He's too weak. He can't call it out for what it is.
Sir Keir Starmer speaking there. Now, GB News understands that the number of MPs demanding a no-confidence vote in the Speaker has climbed to 77. It's after the Commons was plunged into chaos when Sir Lindsay Hoyle decided to hear a Labour amendment to an SNP motion calling for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza. It was a clear break from long-standing convention and was largely seen as a positive move for the Labour Party. Another vote on the issue is expected this week. A member of the US military who set himself on fire outside the Israeli embassy in Washington at the weekend has died. It's understood he was wearing military fatigues and shouted "Free Palestine" as he streamed the apparent protest online. More information is expected to be announced after the military has notified the man's family. And the Prime Minister says new investment in transport for the north of England and the Midlands is levelling up in action. It's after the government outlined plans for the reallocation of funds following the cancellation of HS2's northern leg. It will be up to local councils to allocate the funds. The Mayor of Greater Manchester, Andy Burnham, dismissed the plan, saying the money had already been promised 10 years ago. But Transport Secretary Mark Harper says the government is empowering local communities.
£2.5 billion for the north, £2.2 billion for the Midlands. That money is going to local councils. It's for them to spend on the local priorities that they set, that they think are important to their local communities, and they'll reach those conclusions by consulting those communities, but also talking, very importantly, to their members of parliament about what those important local transport priorities are. The whole point is it's not for ministers to set those priorities, it's for councils to set them. We think those decisions are better made closer to the people that are going to benefit from them.
Meanwhile, Sir Keir Starmer says his party will deliver what he called a future built in Britain by Britain if Labour wins the next election. He says the plan to run a so-called patriotic economy will include boosting home ownership and establishing the next generation of new towns. Housing Minister Lee Rowley described the proposal as empty, but Chair of the Labour Party, Annalise Dodds, told GB News it's the change Britain needs.
Kind of expectations that people in our country used to have, that their kids would be better off than they were, that they'd have at least a slightly better quality of life. All of those dreams are just completely out of reach for very many people in our country. And Keir Starmer is absolutely determined to change that for the future, getting Britain building, actually making sure we have those good jobs up and down the country, reforming the planning system. The many changes that he's setting out today would make that big difference to British people.
In other news, farmers are on the streets of Brussels, setting fire to tyres and blocking streets with their tractors in a protest against cheap supermarket prices. Riot police were seen firing water cannons as EU ministers arrived for meetings on the growing crisis. The farmers are demanding action from the European Union on free trade agreements, which they blame for damaging European farming. It's the latest in a series of similar protests across the bloc, with the EU already moving to weaken some of its green policies. For the latest stories, sign up to GB News alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts. Now it's back to Martin.
Thank you, Sophia. Now, we've got an epic show ahead, and of course, there's only one place to start, and that's the row over the alleged Islamophobic comments made by MP Lee Anderson. That's intensified. Anderson issued a statement this morning defending what he said and attacked Sadiq Khan's record as London Mayor. Khan then accused him of pouring petrol over the fires of hatred. Well, the Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, has now waded into the row, and this is what he had to say.
Prime Minister should call it out for what it is. The reason he won't is because he's so weak. They're divided, they're chaotic, and if they're re-elected, we're going to have 5 more years of this. It is only Labour now that can unite the country, bring people together, turn a page on this and actually usher in the sort of society, the sort of future that people desperately want. But the Prime Minister lacks the strength. He's too weak. He can't call it out for what it is.
Well, let's hear from the Prime Minister now, because in the past hour we've heard from Rishi Sunak. He's defended his position and how he dealt with the controversy.
Clear that what Lee said was wrong, it was unacceptable, and that's why we suspended the whip. And it's important that everybody, but particularly elected politicians, are careful with their words and do not inflame tensions.
But there's a difference between wrong and Islamophobic. Were they Islamophobic?
Well, I think the most important thing is that the words were wrong. They were ill-judged, they were unacceptable, and that's what I believe, and that's why the whip has been suspended. And I think everyone can see that tensions are already running high, and what I want to do, I think what the country wants to see, is the heat taken out of this debate, and I think that's the right thing to do.
If he were to apologise, would you welcome him back into the party?
Again, look, we literally have just had these comments. As I said, I don't think they're right, they're not acceptable. That's why the whip has been suspended, and that's where we are now.
It's not just him, though, is it? Suella Braverman, for instance, has talked about the Islamists, the extremists and the anti-Semites being in control. This is someone you appointed as Home Secretary. What's going on inside your party?
Well, I think that those comments were not about an individual in particular. There is a broader point that some of the scenes that we have been witnessing on our streets in recent times are unacceptable.
OK, there we go. So much to pick over. And joining us now is GBNews' political correspondent, Catherine Forster. Catherine, welcome to the show. So 72 hours on from when Lee made those now infamous comments on my show on Friday, the debate rumbles on. Sadiq Khan calling the comments vile, racist, Islamophobic. But quite telling, I thought there, Catherine, Prime Minister Rishi Sunak wouldn't be drawn on the same condemnation, and he refused to rule out Lee Anderson's return to the Conservative Party.
Yes, he didn't rule it out, but it does seem difficult to see how Lee Anderson might rejoin the Conservatives anytime very soon, given the enormous amount of heat and noise that his comments on your show on Friday, Martin, have created. Sir Keir Starmer was here in Shrewsbury to talk about housing, but everybody really is talking about at the moment is this row engulfing the Conservative Party. Now, Nigel Farage, Richard Tice of Reform have made it very clear that they would welcome Lee Anderson to them with open arms. And it has been really quite an incredible fall from grace for him. It's only a couple of months since he was deputy chairman of the Conservative. He was given precisely because he said, he told it how many people the Conservatives think that things are. He tells it like it is. That's part of his appeal to many people across the country. And in fact, plenty of Conservative MPs being cross messages from constituents about the fact that the Conservatives had taken the whip from him. So lots of people very angry about the way he's been treated. Lots of other people thinking that his comments are appalling, that they are racist, that they are Islamophobic. Interesting, isn't it, that the Conservatives and Rishi Sunak have not used those words, though plenty of other people have. And Keir Starmer very keen to say that Rishi Sunak, is weak, and that's why he's not calling this out more strongly, that they're weak. party in chaos. It's very politically useful to Keir Starmer to say that. Of course, there's an election looming, and let's not forget, he's got plenty of divisions within his own party. He's got plenty of extremists in his own party. We've got the situation at the end of the week with a by-election in Rochdale, not Labour candidate, because they had to boot the candidate out because of anti-Semitic remarks. So this war in Gaza happening a very, very long way away, having really real consequences here, and a lot of toxicity, a lot of ill feeling, and no sign of any of that dying down.
OK, Catherine Forster, thank you for that update. I've been speaking to Lee over the weekend. I've got lots more to share with you. The inside line on this story that's captivating the media at the moment. We'll be joined by Benedict Spence after this. But first of all, we're going to go to a short break.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria Di Piero, bringing you
PMQs live here on GB News. Every Wednesday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions when Rishi Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer go head-to-head in the House of Commons.
We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQs live here on GB News, Britain's election channel.
The Camilla Tominey Show, Sunday mornings from 9:30.
Questions to be answered, and there seemed to be a significant amount, does once again point its way to a public inquiry into exactly what happened in this case. Starmer's called for that. Would you call for that too?
I certainly think that first of all, there's one thing that's happening now. The NHS have to order an independent inquiry. That's been done. So they've got to look at all the whys and wherefores of what happened with this man. If it appears that we're not getting sufficient depth and breadth to this, then I think having an inquiry with all the powers that brings would be extremely advantageous. What I don't want is some long-winded inquiry that will take years, by which time other people will have been put at risk and maybe other lives have lost. We know what the problems are here, Camilla. Law's been passed on this. This is all about making sure on the ground we implement the highest degree of monitoring in order to ensure the safety of the public.
Has care in the community failed? I mean, it seems oxymoronic to say that it's care in the community in this case. We know that the number of psychiatric care beds has been slashed from 52,000 back in 2001 to 24,000 now. I've anecdotally, because I wrote my column about this in The Telegraph yesterday, received quite a lot of correspondence from people saying the situation with care in the community is dire. People aren't being adequately monitored. Was it a mistake to close down all of those mental institutions?
I don't think we should go back to those days when we had those appalling institutions where we just lock people away and forget about them, and not just mental health people, but autistic people and disabled people. Horrific way to treat individuals, and you know I campaign on that a lot.
I know.
However, I think if we move into a more community-based approach, which can be really good for many, many people who are on the spectrum and on that scale of mental health, we have to remember there will be a small but significant number who will continue to pose a danger.
Okay.
And that's why monitoring is so important.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So, send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. It's 3:17. You're watching or listening to Martin Daubney on GB News. Well, join me now for the political analysis of the fallout of Lee Anderson's comments on my show on Friday. It's political commentator Benedict Spence. Benedict, welcome to the show. So now the Tories are revolting again, this time over Lee Anderson's comments. He issued a statement to GB News earlier. He is saying he will not apologise. It's a sign of weakness. And it was made clear over the weekend, Benedict, that if he did apologise, he'll be allowed back into the Conservative Party. He would get the whip. What do you think should be done? I mean, Sadiq Khan has called the comments vile, racist and Islamophobic. But I've been speaking with Lee, and he's told me in no uncertain terms his inbox is bursting at the seams with red wall voters who agree with what he said. What's your take?
Well, that's the thing, isn't it? I think probably Lee Anderson might agree that I think he has said that his words were a little clumsy, but actually what is being inferred from them is not, I think, at all the case. And I think once again, it's sort of an example of quite how people can be browbeaten into, not speaking their mind simply with allegations of Islamophobia. And I think it's rather interesting now that, having gone through the furore of the Labour Party ripping up convention ostensibly in the House of Commons on the basis that MPs were feeling threatened, that almost like sort of Stockholm syndrome, they managed to turn this round and go, oh no, actually Islamophobia is the major problem, and here is this one example. And this means we're going to be able to completely kick this story out of the news cycle and focus on something else. And now you have Annalise Dodds and other Labour MPs coming out and saying that once we're in power, we're going to change the definition of what Islamophobia is to make it incredibly difficult to criticize any aspect of this religion, including aspects that are very deeply problematic. And I think ultimately Lee Anderson probably feels rather frustrated, perhaps, to a degree, that it just happened like that. But I think a lot of ordinary people will feel very frustrated. As to whether or not the Tories can now return the whip on the basis of an apology, well, it depends what it's for. If he says, I didn't mean to be, Islamophobic, but there are some very real issues that I think need to be addressed, and this is perhaps what I should have said, okay, fine. But actually, if what they're asking him to do is basically lie and say, no, you say you don't actually think that these things are important, well, I don't think that's in his interest, and I also don't think it's in the interest of the Tory party to sort of back down in the face of a Labour onslaught. This was a Labour story, actually, about how their MPs were feeling bullied by protesters. Why is it now that that has been allowed to be supplanted in the news cycle by the very people, some of the very people, at least, who the original story was about?
Yeah, do you think that is a bit of a problem? In a sense, the Labour Party were on a back foot, the SNP were on a back foot. We saw those disgraceful scenes, which in another country would be called an insurrection, but yet here they weren't. It affected the votes. We've seen disgraceful scenes over the weekend. In fact, Benedict, I'm talking to a councillor at 5:30 who was in that meeting in Stoke that was stormed by the protesters, and yet here we are. Has Lee Anderson allowed the conversation to go back, if you like, into safe territory for the Labour Party?
That's what frustrates me about this, is that whatever Lee's intentions, ultimately it has been allowed to be spun a certain way. And I think that he knows, he's been in politics a while now. He knows as well as anybody, you do have to be very careful about your language because people will try to spin it any which way. But you're right to highlight the fact that, what is now being spoken about is the danger of Islamophobia and the danger of the far right. It's always the far right. That you'd have thought they'd be tired out by now, given that they've been on the march across Europe and this country for about 15 years and never actually got to their destination. But that's always what the issue is, not, as you've just pointed out, people harassing MPs outside of Parliament, people beaming genocidal slogans illegally onto the side of Parliament, not breaking up council meetings. Why is it that we're not talking about that and we're instead talking about Lee Anderson? It's because nobody wants to address the very thorny issue, which is that in a lot of communities, actually, Gaza as a singular topic, but also political Islam as a sort of a broader topic, has taken root in some communities, not all, in some areas, and it is a major vehicle. It is a major driving force. And actually, when people talk about the danger of the far right, I always think you will get the far right if you continue to insist on ignoring these other very proactive movements. Far-right activism is very reactive. It needs something to react to. So whenever I hear people talking about the dangers of far-right rhetoric, I think, well, let's think where it's coming from. It's because there is a lot of quite controversial political Islam in this country, and it is simply swept under the rug and it is not addressed. That is how you will get from A to B.
And Benedict, obviously Lee's comments, he will admit himself, as usual, about as subtle as a note tied to a house brick and flung at you. Nevertheless, we're having an important conversation, aren't we? And don't you think it's slightly through the looking glass that Annalise Dodds, who was harassed at a meeting, Angela Rayner harassed on the streets by pro-Palestine protesters, Sir Keir Starmer chased off a train in Scotland by pro-Palestinian protesters, Rachel Reeves harassed on the streets. The Labour Party are getting the thick end of this too, and yet they seemingly cannot grasp the nettle and deal with what's actually driving it, and instead they're blaming Lee Anderson and the mythical far right.
Well, that's why I describe it as almost like Stockholm syndrome, is that rather than actually confront this head on, it's almost like they're trying to turn around to the people that they feel threatened by and say, no, we're on your side. Please don't hurt us. You know, saying to the crocodile, please eat us last, because we're actually on your side, guys. Trust us on this. And I think it's a bit of a losing battle, because this is also, let's be clear, this is not just about Islamism. It's also about the far left. For the far left, for which religion is not the issue, Gaza is a hot topic on the idea of anti-colonialism. And we can, another day perhaps we can get into the lunacy of that, but it's a twin-pronged approach. It's not simply about one aspect. They're getting it from two different dimensions in their own electorate. And what they fail to understand is these people will never side with them. These people will never forgive them, actually. As much as anything else, they won't forgive Labour centrists for the role the Labour Party played in both Iraq and Afghanistan. That's something that they don't seem to think, to grasp. And they just think, as long as we're nice to these factions, one day they'll sympathise and they'll be nice to us. And it's a fool's errand. They will never stop pushing the centre of the Labour Party further to the left to kowtow to them on these issues.
Barry Spence, excellent analysis on the start of the show. Thank you very much for joining us. Superb as ever. Great stuff. We'll have loads on that throughout the rest of the show, and I've got lots of juicy gossip from the man himself. Moving on, Angela Rayner has been labelled a hypocrite for making a profit of £48,500 following the sale of her ex-council house, which she purchased under the Right to Buy policy in 2007 with a 25% discount. You may recall Right to Buy, one of Thatcher's flagship policies. Well, Rayner has since tweeted, adding, being able to buy my council house back in 2007 was a proud moment for me. I worked hard, saved and bought it by the book. Well, joining me now in the studio to discuss this is property expert Richard Blanco. Richard, thanks for joining us in the studio. On the one hand, you think good luck to her. I mean, after all, many working class people were afforded the right to buy back in the day. Many of them said it was one of the best things Maggie Thatcher ever did. But what people don't like is hypocrisy.
Yes, I guess so. Now, I think the key issue actually with Right to Buy is the fact that we didn't use the money that we got from the sale of council houses to build more. That's the big issue. This is a popular policy amongst lots of quarters, really. And, you know, who can blame her for using whatever was available at the time? I think, you know, some people are complaining that she potentially wants to reduce the discounts if she goes into power. I think that could well be reasonable because, you know, this is public money and, you know, we need those discounts to be at a reasonable level.
A lot of people would like to see Right to Buy return. But you are right, without the actual housing stock. And I guess what's the legacy of Right to Buy? Is it a fantastic way to get the working classes bought into the property market, to get them proud of their ownership rather than not taking care of it because it was a council property? Or did we forever sell off a precious public asset?
Well, look, we sold 3 million council homes between 1979 and 1995, and we didn't replace them. That was the crime, really, if you like. I think we can get a bit too obsessed and hung up on home ownership. Both main political parties want home ownership to go up from 64% to 70%. But what they forget is a lot of people need to rent, and we need more social rent homes. We need more private rented sector homes. As we know, rents have been going up over the last year or so, and I think the government needs to stop its obsession with home ownership.
Well, a lot of people would disagree. I think an Englishman and an Englishwoman's home is their castle, bricks and mortar, your retirement plan. But of course, we now see a huge supply issue. And so therefore, that dream is now increasingly beyond the grasps of many people, particularly young people who just can't afford ever to save for a deposit. What about this notion that Keir Starmer has put forward today of building new towns? This is an old idea. Will it work again? Do people want to live in a new town, or do they want to live in current existing towns as it is, where the work is?
I agree with Keir Starmer on this. I think we need to be that radical. I mean, the Labour Party is talking about building 1.5 million houses across a 5-year parliament. Of course, that relies very heavily on getting some of those big construction companies involved and also reforming the planning system. I think he's right to be that radical. We haven't built 300,000 homes a year for certainly not this century and not since the 60s and 70s. We need to find radical solutions, and we absolutely need to build more homes and more social rent homes.
Don't we have a double bind though, because we need more homes, yet we're just tied up in NIMBYism, in planning restrictions, in councils who don't want anything in their locale, and as a consequence, nothing ever gets built. Meanwhile, we've got 745 net migration last year. The demand is getting higher and higher. The supply is getting shorter and shorter. Woof. everyone is spending so much of a percentile of their income on rent or mortgage.
Yeah, I mean, it's not just about net migration. It's also about people just wanting to leave home and set up their own home. It's about people becoming students. It's about people moving for work. You know, things like the private rented sector is vital to our economy because it provides that sort of flexibility that the population needs. At the moment, we've got landlords being driven out of the market by punitive taxation. What we need is a kind of growth strategy, really, from this government and from the next government to encourage landlords to invest, to encourage councils and housing associations to invest so that we get more private and social rented stock.
You've probably had this conversation now for donkey's years. I certainly have. And we've been talking about a critical housing shortage now for absolute donkey's years. Nothing ever seems to happen. Why not?
Well, we've had 16 housing ministers since 2010, so that tells you something. This isn't enough of a priority for politicians. I think politicians see it as a bit of a political hot potato, and they just, you know, there are very few that really understand. I think Clive Betts, who's chair of the Housing Select Committee, does, and his committee put out a very sensible report recently on this topic. But I think really it's the whole topic is mired in dogma, and politicians get too bogged down by how many votes they can win by trying to promote home ownership, by trying to promote rights for tenants. You know, what we need is, for example, in the private rented sector, is so much property available that actually poor quality property doesn't get rented, and because there's so much property available, rents do start to come down. Now, nobody has that sort of perspective, and that's the sort of view that we need.
But there are many, many people, Richard, parents who see their own children unable. It's now becoming a flight of fancy, you know, to be able to ever own a home. That sticks in the craw because it should, I believe, be not a right, but something you work hard for, to save for. It's your retirement plan, it's your children's inheritance. That's being crucially denied. And a lot of people do. I know you've said it's not just to do with immigration. Of course, it's not just to do with that. But quite simply, when we have that many people coming in every year, it does place a huge pressure on the existing stock.
It is a supply issue. Let's not forget that we need lots of those migrants actually to fulfil the jobs that need to be done, because there's a huge shortage actually of people available to do jobs. But we shouldn't obsess with affordability for first-time buyers. Yes, it's very difficult in London and the South East, but it's not difficult in whole swathes of the UK. You know, East Midlands, which is where I grew up, you can still buy a terraced house for 120, 130,000 in Nottinghamshire.
Here, yeah.
Yes, there you go. You see.
Great words of comfort. Thank you for those out there. Richard Blanco, property expert, thanks for joining us on the show. Superb as ever. Now, there's lots still more to come between now and 4 o'clock. A report says slashing immigration to the UK would leave us all with an extra 1,100 quid a year in our pockets. So I'm asking this simple question. Is this the solution to Britain's economic woes? But first, it's time for your latest news headlines with Sophia Wensler.
Thank you, Martin. It's 3:30. I'm Sophia Wensler in the GB newsroom. The Prime Minister has refused to describe Lee Anderson's comments as Islamophobic after he said this morning that they were unacceptable and wrong. The former Tory Deputy Chairman released a statement this morning aimed at clarifying remarks he made on this network when he suggested that Islamists had got control of the Mayor of London. Admitting his words were clumsy, he said that he was intending to highlight what he believes is Mr Khan's failure to tackle pro-Palestine protests. Writing in the Evening Standard today, Sadiq Khan described the comments as vile, racist, anti-Muslim and Islamophobic. GB News understands that the number of MPs demanding a no-confidence vote in the Speaker has climbed to 77. It's after the Commons was plunged into chaos when Sir Lindsay Hoyle decided to hear a Labour amendment to an SNP motion calling for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza. It was a clear break from long-standing convention and was largely seen as a positive move for the Labour Party. Another vote on the issue is expected this week. And new investment in transport for the north of England and the Midlands is levelling up in action. That's according to Rishi Sunak. It's after the government outlined plans for the reallocation of funds following the cancellation of HS2's northern leg. The money could be used to expand mass transit systems, refurbish rail and bus stations and repair potholes. It will be up to local councils to allocate the funds. But the Mayor of Greater Manchester, Andy Burnham, dismissed the plan, saying the money was already promised 10 years ago. And for the latest story, sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
For stunning gold and silver coins you'll always value, Rosland Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
And here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2677 and €1.1694. The price of gold is £1,598 and 78 pence per ounce. And the FTSE 100's at 7,693 points.
Rosland Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Thank you, Sophia. Now, coming up, Trump takes aim at Prince Harry as he claims if he returns to the White House, his immigration status would be reviewed. Could Trump send the Duke packing back to Blighty? Excellent stuff. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, Britain's news channel.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall?
Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. Weekdays from midday.
Francis, Just Stop Oil have in the past broken the law. I remember distinctly the Dartford crossing. That ended up with 2 jailed, I believe, if I remember correctly. Is it ever justified in your view?
Yeah, thanks so much for having me on. I mean, I would have to say yes. I mean, we're trying to preserve my life, your lives, the lives of your family, and it's not just the planet that we're trying to protect, it's the lives of millions of people. And, you know, we know from history that we have to break the law in order to put pressure on the government and to be listened to.
No one would doubt your sincerity in your views. You genuinely believe in what you fight for. But there are others who think differently. For example, there are Islamist extremists who believe that people will go to hell unless they convert to Islam. They will sincerely, perhaps, break the law in order to force people to convert. In their view, they might be saving people's lives for eternity. There might be abortion activists who say that babies are being murdered and to save their lives we need to break the law to stop people having abortions. Why do you get to say that your moral conviction is the one that's right and other people's individual moral conviction are those that are wrong?
So what's really integral to the Just Stop Oil campaign is the fact that it is a non-violent campaign. That's what separates us from the examples that you've just given. We're absolutely dedicated non-violence, both as a tactic and as a principle. So though we might be breaking the law...
If individuals take it upon themselves to break the law for whatever their course is, surely the way that we decide what society wants in general is democratic and within the law.
Well, of course, we know also that protest is absolutely integral to maintaining and upholding a democracy, and in particular, non-violent protest. I mean, I really can't express to you how severe this situation is, and I'm sure you know this.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So, send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. It's 3:37. You're watching or listening to Martin Daubney on GB News. Now, analysis by the Growth Commission indicates that reducing yearly net migration would enhance living standards for years to come. The Commission projected a decline in the UK's annual net migration, estimating a decrease from 315,000 in 2028 to around 150,000, which resulted, by their maths, in a 1,157 boost per person per year in 2023 prices. Well, that's quite a tantalising prospect. So to analyse that now, I'm joined in the studio by Alp Mehmet, the chairman of Migration Watch. Alp, it's always a pleasure to see you.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Before we get into the details of this report, can you quantify the size of migration to the UK? And actually, I think those figures are a bit optimistic, aren't they?
I think that they do understate it, yes, very much so. The fact is that they're working on the assumption that net migration will fall to 315,000 from 2028 onwards. I think that's highly unlikely, frankly. And if you look at the numbers actually coming in now, and bear in mind, we're talking about net migration. So even if you brought it down to net migration of 150,000, we're still talking about a huge inflow.
Yeah.
And over the last 30 years, research after research has consistently shown that migration, net migration, is an overall cost. It costs you and me money. So if you're going to reduce the numbers, then to me, it's a no-brainer. Of course, you're going to reduce the cost. And that's what is going to happen. The cake has been growing and growing and growing. The slice that you and I get has remained pretty much the same, and in the last few years it actually got smaller. If you reduce the size of the cake and you reduce the number of people eating it, then inevitably the slice will increase in size. That's what's going to happen.
So basically, the fewer people that come in, the more there will be to go around. And of course, that also doesn't take into account things that you talk about all the time, Out, but that is things like housing supply, public services supply. That will all be freed up. So therefore, that will require less money going in. That should be a tax deficit.
Martin, over the last 20 years, between the two censuses, 2001 and 2021, our population grew by 8 million people. Nearly 7 million of that was due to immigration. Immigrants and their children. If we continue at 600,000 people net, within 25 years, our population will increase by 20 million people. And the vast majority of that will be due to immigration. That's why immigration at the present scale is a noose around Britain's neck, and the sooner we get rid of it by cutting immigration, the better.
But Alp, a lot of people say we're an ageing population, we're not even reaching replacement rates in our population, people are having fewer children later in life, and therefore we need immigration to take care of us. What's your response to that?
Martin, what I always say is, look, here I am in my dotage. I arrived as an 8-year-old. If you're going to bring people in to look after people in their old age, bear in mind that they too will get old. So all you're doing is needing more and more people in order to come in, ostensibly to look after the old people. What I would do is actually pay a little bit more, make work a little bit more rewarding than it is, and pay for people in care homes more than we are doing at the moment. And we'll find that we've got plenty of people prepared to take the jobs. There's millions of people, frankly, who could be working and aren't at the moment. That's what we've got to tackle.
2.4 million on the long-term sick now. I want to get you on something else, as I have you here, Alp. Lee Anderson's comments. What do you think? Should he apologise?
That's for him, whether to apologise or not. Look, Lee Anderson is not a racist. You know that, I know that, and I dare say Sadiq Khan knows that as well. What he said, the way he said it, he spoke as a politician, frankly, and all politicians tend to go a little bit over the top to make a point. But what I would say is that there's a hell of a lot of people in this country, up and down the land, who think exactly as he does and welcome what he said, even if they would shade it slightly.
OK, Alp Mehmet, thank you so much for joining us in the studio. The chairman of Migration Watch. Excellent as ever. Thank you very much. Now, moving on, still to come, it's the President versus the Prince, as Donald Trump accuses Prince Harry of betraying the late Queen. But first, in a GB News series, Innovation Britain, we're looking at the success of the great British manufacturing industry around the country.
Britain Fire Suppression have just won a huge contract out in Dubai, all because of their infrastructure that Ed here has created in Chelmsford. So tell me the story, Ed.
So we obviously produce fire systems for, one of the areas we produce fire systems for is vehicles. So what we're seeing across the world is a huge investment into the fire protection on vehicles. You're starting to see it more on social media. Battery fires are becoming a thing on buses and coaches. So, but for the most of the part, a lot of public transport is still diesel-based or gas-based. So we've run a massive retrofit campaign in Dubai. That involves a huge quantity of parts, systems, that involves a huge quantity of machine parts. And it's a big logistical challenge, not only to supply the systems, but for the guys and our partner out there to install them. But what the investment that we've done here enables us to do is produce the quantity of parts that we need to get out the door in order to do the supply. And it keeps, for me, the biggest important point with that contract and other contracts is by being here, we don't need to hold the stock levels like a lot of OEMs would for the inevitable, this order might come in, this order comes in. When we get a particular order in, we're just making the parts we need for that particular contract. So unlike with a subcontractor, I'd need to hold all of these parts in stock. I've now got a very dynamic stock system where big order comes in, we make the parts behind us.
There you have it.
Brilliant.
Thinking ahead of that, you're ahead of your game. You're thinking about future-proofing the business and the industry. Congratulations. I think you're going to do really well.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Lee Anderson's Real World. Fridays from 7 p.m.
Dr. Jane Jones, who's the clinical lead for Care After Combat.
Yep.
Jane, thanks for coming. And just tell me a little bit about your organisation. What do you do?
OK, well, thank you for having me here so we can talk about Care After Combat. So we are an organisation, a charity, who work into the prison system, working with military veterans who've somehow got involved with the justice system and...
So there's quite a high population of ex-servicemen and women in our prisons. Why is that, do you think?
So 2014, the government did a review of who was resident in UK prisons, and what they found were that military veterans are the highest occupational group, and this obviously raises some concerns. Yeah. So the government wanted to do something about that, and so they supported Care After Combat initially just as a scoping exercise, really, to see if there was any way we could help these men and women actually, you know, understand the problems that led to offending behaviour and go on to lead successful lives.
So what sort of offending behaviour are we talking typically for people that's in prison that's actually served in our armed forces?
Primarily, it's violence.
Yeah.
So that is the highest offence that we work with.
Okay.
But of course, the military, as with everybody else, it's the full range of offending behaviour.
OK, so we're in a pub, Jane, Dr. Jane, and I guess for some people, you know, the old tip of alcohol is good, a bit of fun of a weekend, relax, let your hair down. But for some people, alcohol is not always their best friend, and I guess that plays a part in some of your veterans that end up inside.
Absolutely. So, speaking from my own experience, a good 2/3 of the people I work with have some kind of mental health problem or mental health difficulty, struggling to either adapt into civilian life or with some of the traumas they've experienced during service. People might self-medicate with alcohol to manage some of those thoughts and feelings.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Have a great Saturday night with me, Leo Curse, on the Saturday Night Showdown. It's a crazy world out there, so come and make fun of it with me, my panel of comedians, and a couple of people who actually know what they're talking about. This Saturday Night Showdown is your front row ticket to the clown show every Saturday, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. It's 3:47. You're watching or listening to Martin Daubney on GBNews. Thank you for your company as ever. Now, Donald Trump says Prince Harry will be on his own if he returns to the presidency, following what he believes to be unforgivable disloyalty to the late Queen Elizabeth. And this comes as Harry finds himself in hot water once again, following controversy over whether his immigration records should be kept secret after illegal drug consumption was referred to in his book Spare. And meanwhile, Prince Harry's Invictus Games documentary has begun screening on streaming channel Hulu as Netflix said that Harry and wife Meghan remain under a contract with them. Well, I'm now joined by royal correspondent and writer, the legend that is Michael Cole. Michael, it's always an absolute pleasure to have you on the show. Let's start with what I think is a delicious butting of heads. The Prince versus the President. Delicious. Tell us about it.
Fascinating, Martin. It really is. Donald Trump's old Scottish mother came from Stornoway on the Isle of Lewis in the Hebrides, and she was a great admirer of the late Queen, and Donald Trump is a great admirer of the late Queen, and he feels that by his actions, by his books, by his television programs, Prince Harry, who we see there with his wonderful wife, has been disrespectful to the royal family and the Queen in particular. But there is a political element of this, of course, because Meghan Markle has made it no secret that she is not an admirer of Donald Trump. Uniquely, as a member of the royal family, she actually voted in the American presidential election of 2020. And you can bet your life she didn't vote for Donald J. Trump, but rather for his opponent, President Biden. And it got through to President Trump that when he was making official visits to this country, that she was saying that she was unwilling to meet him. So that is the background of that. And of course, she may have, and I think it's a fairly good bet, have political ambitions of her own, either on a state basis in California or maybe even nationally. That is yet to come. So that is the background to that. And it's quite a serious matter, actually, for Prince Harry, because the Heritage Foundation, which is a right-wing pressure group, is pushing in the court in Washington, D.C. to have his records, Prince Harry's records of when he applied for a visa to live in America, made public. And in those forms, there is a loaded question which has to be ticked yes or no, which says, have you used drugs or illegal drugs, or have you ever used illegal drugs, or are you a drug addict? Now, if he has ticked that to say no, there is contradictory evidence, circumstantial evidence, strong evidence in his book Spare, which is littered with references to him smoking weed, cannabis, taking cocaine, which he said he didn't like, and ingesting magic mushrooms. So, of course, an admission in a book isn't sworn evidence, it's not testimony, but it is fairly strong circumstantial evidence that he took drugs. And if it is revealed that he did not tell the truth in his visa form, the Americans vigilate their immigration very seriously, unlike this country. And he could be kicked out of the country. His visa could be annulled, and he could be asked to leave America promptly.
And, Michael, it's fair to say that Donald Trump, no matter what you think of him, was in absolute awe of her late Queen Majesty, Queen Elizabeth, absolutely in awe of her. Do you think there's something in the fact that he feels that it might be his duty to right this wrong, to make Harry suffer for what he perceives Prince Harry did to the Queen?
I think you're absolutely on the money there, because with Donald Trump, you're either in or out. You're either friend or foe. And that the difference is that if he regards you as a foe, he will do his best to act against you. I mean, there's no doubt about it. It's as clear as night from day. It's a very serious matter, because if that did happen, where would the prince go? Back to Canada? where they were before they came to California? Well, the Canadians won't be too happy about picking up the bill for security for a spare royal who hasn't really got a job and may be on an extended stay. And what will happen about Meghan and the two children, Prince Archie and Princess Lilibet? Will they go with him? And if he comes back here, of course, he'll have to come back here with his tail between his legs. And I tell you one thing, Prince William, his older brother, won't be at the welcome home party.
OK, and what about this Netflix documentary, The Invictus Games? Another farce seems to be unrolling.
Yeah, that's interesting. When the Duke and Duchess of Sussex rebranded their media company from Archwell to be Sussex, there was no mention of Netflix, and yet they have a ginormous contract, more than $100 million, with Netflix, but they were not mentioned at all, which may be a straw in the wind about what's happening there. And they have made this other film, which is about Invictus and the meaning of Invictus, which of course is very commendable and upon which we can congratulate Prince Harry, is being made with a rival company. So what is going on there in the background, we do not know, but we have heard that Netflix feeling that they are not getting value for money. They're not getting the boost. They're not getting the bang for the buck that they've invested in this lovely couple from Montecito, California. And there may be some fallout from that before long.
OK, excellent stuff. As ever, Michael Cole, superb analysis. Always a pleasure to have you on the show. I love that royal salute at the end. That's your trademark. Now, there's lots more still coming up in today's show as we bring you the latest on the Tory Islamophobia row. As City Khan has hit out at Lee Anderson, saying he's poured petrol on the fires of hatred. Now, we'll be hearing from Lee Anderson himself, who's been speaking to GB News exclusively. And in fact, he was in this very studio, sat right there, just before my show. He's done an exclusive sit-down interview with Patrick Christys for tonight, and that will be shown on Patrick Christys 9 to 11. Patrick Christys tonight. I overheard it. It's absolutely sensational stuff. You will not want to miss it. Here's a guy in a corner. Here's a guy who his opponents want to take the knee. I'm telling you now, I don't think it's in Lee Anderson's DNA to do anything of the sort. We'll have the full analysis on all of that. We'll show you an exclusive trailer in the next part of the show and asking that big question, should he apologise or should Rishi Sunak take him in? I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, Britain's news channel.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, good afternoon. Welcome to your latest GB News weather update with me, Annie from the Met Office. It should be staying dry for many areas through the rest of the day with some late sunshine to come. However, it will be a cold night tonight. That's as high pressure is building in from the south and west, so that will settle things down through the rest of the night. However, in the north and west, we'll start to see some thicker cloud and rain arrive by tomorrow morning. So the winds should ease tonight, allowing for temperatures to dip down quite early on, and we should see some mist and fog developing mainly across central and southeastern areas. That could be quite slow to clear tomorrow morning. But away from any mist and fog, it will turn frosty, particularly for inland areas of Wales, England, northern England as well. Further north and west, though, we'll see some wet weather arrive by tomorrow morning. Quite a blustery band of rain will push through around rush hour for northwestern areas of Scotland and into Northern Ireland too. That could bring some snow to the high ground of Scotland, and then that rain will push into parts of northern England and parts of Wales as well to bring a wet afternoon for these areas. Further south and east, though, it should stay dry, but it will be a much cloudier day than today, and temperatures around average for the time of year, 7 or 8 degrees. Through Wednesday, we'll see another probably misty and murky start to the day before we see the next batch of rain arrive from the west, but this time this will pick up the temperatures. It will turn milder through the course of Wednesday and into Thursday, with further rain arriving into parts of the north and west. It looks a little bit colder to end the week again, though. See you later.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News Breakfast. Every day from 6 a.m.
Claire, you want to talk by cars growing by a couple of centimetres a year?
Yeah, well, 1 centimetre every 2 years.
Okay.
It's unrelenting because the people are so fixated on the big SUVs. The sales have gone through the roof, and yet it's James Nix, the analyst for Transport and Environment Campaign, said the author of the report on the trend said, spurred on by sales of the largest SUVs, vehicles are getting wider every year. Now, what does that mean for us? Well, it means that our roads weren't...
Comfortable ride, beautiful engines, smooth. I mean, it's luxury, it's gorgeous.
Well, as I know, I used to have two, but I don't...
You used to have 2 SUVs?
Well, one SUV at a time, but I had 2 brands of them. But I'd no longer drive in London now because I just don't see the point, because of the ULEZ, because of the, you know, you could run down a thing and get fined.
Parking spaces, whatever.
The growth in car size also causes issues for their drivers. The report found that largely luxury SUVs, which are about 2 metres wide, no longer fit in off-street parking.
That's true.
They also leave too little space for passengers to get in and out of the vehicles in typical off-street spaces, and they're about 2.4 metres wide, the report found. And I'll tell you, I was stuck in a bus last night trying to get home, and the buses couldn't move because the streets were too crammed with all of these massive cars either side.
Chelsea tractors.
And it was gridlocked.
Yeah, but maybe they're not the problem, maybe the buses are the problem.
The buses take people to their place of work and get
I'd
them
like
home.
to know when, because when I go through London, all I see is empty buses.
Oh, you're lucky. Every time I'm on one, they're full.
Well, they're obviously only full at rush hour. You see, the thing is, property developers, when they do high-rise car parks, or, you know, they build a multiplex cinema and there's a car park attached to it, that's not my fault that I can't fit into their space. It's their fault. So
well, it's all driven by money, isn't it? The more spaces that they have,
exactly.
the more people they can get.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So, send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, it's 4 p.m. and welcome to the Martin Daubney Show on GB News, broadcasting live from the heart of Westminster and all across the UK. Coming up on today's show, Lee Anderson fights back. The Islamophobia row at the heart of the Conservative Party hots up to melting point, and the party's former deputy chairman is accused of pouring petrol on the fires of hatred by London Mayor Sadiq Khan. And now Anderson has come out fighting and has spoken to GB News exclusively. We'll be hearing what he has to say later in the show. And as Rishi Sunak condemns his words as wrong, what impact will Lee Anderson's comments have on how voters view the Tories as we head towards that all-important general election? Will it divide the party, or will it unite the Red Wall? And as you can see on your screens, chaos erupts in Brussels as farmers breach police cordons and storm the city centre in protest of EU anti-farming policy. We've got a man on the ground with some astonishing images. Make sure you stick around for that. That's all coming up in your next hour. Welcome to the show, and a very happy Monday to you. It's always a pleasure to have your company. Yeah, Lee Anderson was in this very studio about an hour and a half ago. An exclusive sit-down for the Patrick Christys show tonight, 9 till 11 p.m, with our political editor, also Chris Hope. An absolutely astonishing interview. It's a barnstormer. Lee Anderson, here's a man at the eye of the hurricane, yet standing totally defiant. We'll give you all of the inside lines from that and a sneak preview in the show. Plus, get in touch on that topic, gbviews@gbnews.com. Should he stay? Should he go? Should he apologise? Should Rishi get him back? Are the Tories dead in the water without the red wall Rottweiler Lee Anderson? Let me know your thoughts. But first is your latest news headlines with Polly Middlehurst.
Martin, thank you, and good afternoon to you. Well, the Prime Minister has refused to describe Lee Anderson's comments as Islamophobic after he said this morning that they were unacceptable and wrong. The former Tory Deputy Chairman released a statement earlier on today aimed at clarifying remarks he made on this network where he suggested that Islamists had got control of the Mayor of London. Admitting his words were clumsy, he also added he was intending to highlight what he believes is Mr Khan's failure to tackle pro-Palestine protests. Writing in the Evening Standard today, the London Mayor described the comments as vile, racist, anti-Muslim and Islamophobic. Meanwhile, the leader of the Labour Party says it's the consequence of a weak Prime Minister presiding over a divided party.
It's Islamophobia, and the Prime Minister should call it out for what it is. The reason he won't is because he's so weak. They're divided, they're chaotic, and if they're re-elected, we're going to have 5 more years of this. It is only Labour now that can unite the country, bring people together, turn a page on this and actually usher in the sort of society, the sort of future that people desperately want. But the Prime Minister lacks the strength. He's too weak. He can't call it out for what it is.
Sir Keir Starmer this morning. Well, GBNews understands that the number of MPs demanding a no-confidence vote in the Speaker has now climbed to 77. That's after the Commons was thrown into turmoil last week when Sir Lindsay Hoyle decided to hear a Labour amendment to an SNP motion calling for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza. That was a clear break from long-standing conventions and parliamentary process and was largely seen as a positive move for the Labour Party. Another vote on the issue is expected later on this week. Now, a member of the US military who has set himself on fire outside the Israeli embassy in Washington at the weekend has died. It's understood he was wearing military fatigues and shouting "Free Palestine" as he streamed the apparent protest online. More information is expected to be announced after the military has notified the man's family. A transgender so-called cat killer has been jailed for life and told to serve a minimum term of 24 years for the murder of Jorge Carreño. 36-year-old Scarlett Blake targeted him as a pure act of fantasy inspired by a Netflix documentary. She hit him on the head as he walked home from a night out in Oxford in July 2021 and pushed him into a nearby river where he drowned. His murder came 4 months after Blake live-streamed herself killing a cat. Now, the Prime Minister says new investment in transport for the north of England and the Midlands is levelling up in action. It's after the government outlined plans for the reallocation of funds following the cancellation of HS2's northern leg. It'll be up to local councils to allocate the funds. The Mayor of Greater Manchester, Andy Burnham, dismissed the plan, saying the money had already been promised 10 years ago. But Transport Secretary Mark Harper says the government is empowering local communities.
2.5 billion for the north, 2.2 billion for the Midlands. That money is going to local councils. It's for them to spend on the local priorities that they set, that they think are important to their local communities, and they'll reach those conclusions by consulting those communities, but also talking, very importantly, to their members of parliament about what those important local transport priorities are. The whole point is it's not for ministers to set those priorities, it's for councils to set them. We think those decisions are better made closer to the people that are going to benefit from them.
Sir Keir Starmer says his party will deliver what he called a future built in Britain by Britain if Labour wins the next election. He says the plan to run a so-called patriotic economy will include boosting home ownership and establish the next generation of new towns. Housing Minister Lee Rowley described the proposal as empty, but Chair of the Labour Party, Annalise Dodds, told GB News it's the change Britain needs.
Kind of expectations that people in our country used to have, that their kids would be better off than they were, that they'd have at least a slightly better quality of life. You know, all of those dreams are just completely out of reach for very many people in our country. And Keir Starmer is absolutely determined to change that for the future, getting Britain building, actually making sure we have those good jobs up and down the country, reforming the planning system. The many changes that he's setting out today would make that big difference to British people.
Annalise Dodds. Well, for the very latest stories, do sign up for GB News Alerts. Try scanning that QR code you can see on your screen right now if you're listening on radio. Try going to gbnews.com/alerts.
Thank you, Polly. Superb stuff as ever. Now to our top story this hour, and of course that's the growing row over the alleged Islamophobic comments by MP for Ashfield Lee Anderson made on my show on Friday afternoon. And the London Mayor Sadiq Khan has accused the former deputy chair of the Conservative Party of fuelling the fires of hatred. Well, the Ashfield MP has conducted an interview with Patrick Christys. In fact, it took place in this studio about an hour and a half ago, and that's going to run tonight in full on Patrick Christys tonight at 9 p.m. on GB News. And here's a sneak preview of what Lee Anderson has to say.
If Mayor Khan is not coming out on TV or any media channel and saying this is disgusting what's happening on our streets in London, we should not have these graphics being flashed onto Big Ben, this is shocking, this is terrible, I will clamp down on this. If he's not saying that, then he's lost control. And you can't blame the police for this. He controls the police, that's his job.
And there are so many topics covered off on that. I can't give the game away. Patrick would have to take me and throw me off into a canal. But you will not want to miss it. Excellent stuff. Here's a guy who is not going to apologise anytime soon. Well, earlier this afternoon, the Labour leader waded into the row, criticising the Prime Minister over how he's dealt with the controversy. And here's what Sir Keir Starmer had to say.
The Prime Minister should call it out for what it is. The reason he won't is because he's so weak. They're divided, they're chaotic, and if they're re-elected, we're going to have 5 more years of this. It is only Labour now that can unite the country, bring people together, turn a page on this and actually usher in the sort of society, the sort of future that people desperately want. But the Prime Minister lacks the strength, he's too weak, he can't call it out for what it is.
And that was Sir Keir Starmer, of course. And, well, then attention turned to what the Prime Minister would say on the issue. And Rishi Sunak defended his position and how he dealt with the controversy.
Well, I've been very clear that what Lee said was wrong, it was unacceptable, and that's why we suspended the whip. And it's important that everybody, but particularly elected politicians, are careful with their words and do not inflame tensions. The most important thing is that the words were wrong. They were ill-judged, they were unacceptable, and that's what I believe, and that's why the whip has been suspended. And I think everyone can see that tensions are already running high, and what I want to do, I think what the country wants to see, is the heat taken out of this debate, and I think that's the right thing to do.
But is all this political infighting, this battling, losing sight of the wider debate over concerns in relation to the pro-Palestine protests? And also, of course, the safety of our parliamentarians. Well, joining me now to discuss this is Nayef Ghorbrani, an Iranian anti-Hamas activist. Thank you for joining us in the studio. So we've seen, frankly, horrendous sights on Wednesday when a mob outside seemingly affected the vote. Inside, we've seen parliamentarians from the Labour Party, from the Conservative Party being harassed in the street, having meetings stormed by protesters. How does this make you feel when you see all of this happening on British streets?
Yeah, actually, when I see this happening in UK street, in London street, just remind me what's going on in Iran 1979. You know, I didn't born in this time, but I see the history, I see the videos, and I listen to my parents what they say about that time. You know, exactly same happened in Iran. This time, Islamists and Marxism left wings, they are united together against monarchy. And lock our country down and take the power from the monarchy, from the Shah, and they come to power and still right now, 45 years, they kill the Iranian people. They kill the protester, you know. Why, for example, when happening in Syria, when genocide in Syria with them Bashar Assad, why nobody coming in the street and talking for the ceasefire? You know, just they are talking about when the Muslim kill Muslim doesn't matter, no problem. When they are in fight with the Christian or fighting with them Jews, you know, when they are not enough have a power, they just come around and saying, yeah, ceasefire, ceasefire, ceasefire. Ceasefire for what? For give to Hamas chance again to growing up and kill people around the world. Here in UK, they can't come here in UK. If you give weapon to the guys here when they attack me in the Hamas supporter protest, they kill me straight away without thinking. And if you ask them why you kill him, they don't answer you because they didn't think about that.
Well, they would claim, of course, that Palestine has been occupied. They were forced down that way, and 29,000 have been killed since the start of this war, including 10,000 children. But does that justify what we're seeing happening on British streets? You talked about how the Iranian regime Iran was a wonderful, open, westernised democracy, wasn't it? Before the 1979,
yeah.
And then it descended very quickly into Sharia law.
Exactly. You know, they just starting with them before 1979. They starting for the free speech. They need free speech, more free speech. They need more, you know, have a right to speak, or have a right to, write everything and saying everything. The Shah of Iran gave them chance to have a little bit power, but they take over. And here same here in UK. I think I'm just saying to British people, please just see and read the history of Iran. You know, before 1979, you can understand really good what's going on when you don't wake up and when you didn't against the Islamist and fascist, the protester. You know.
Strong words. Thank you very much for joining us in the studio. Excellent stuff. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, Daubney, an Iranian anti-Hamas activist, and a sobering wake-up call perhaps there to us in Britain. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Now, I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, Britain's news channel. There's loads more coming up, including Is Diversity Ruining Our Armed Forces?
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Patrick Christie's Tonight. Weekdays from 9 p.m.
So a new poll has revealed that Gen Z or Gen Z, I don't know how I'm supposed to say it, and British boys and men are more likely to believe that feminism has done more harm than good when compared with older respondents. So the polling also found that a quarter of UK males aged 16 to 29 believe it's harder to be a man than a woman, with 1 in 5 looking favourably upon controversial influencer Andrew Tate. 37% of them also agree that the phrase toxic masculinity is unhelpful. So, with Gen Z boys increasingly holding this view, has feminism done more harm than good? Let me know your thoughts. Email me, gbviews@gbnews.com, tweet me @gbnews, and make sure you take part in our poll. But I'll bring you those results shortly. Going head-to-head on this tonight are author and commentator Anna May Mangan and YouTuber and social media influencer Pearl Davies. Both of you, thank you very much. Pearl, I'll start with you. Has feminism done more harm than good, especially when it comes to these Gen Z boys?
Yes, it has. Feminism really has turned into a bunch of crybaby women that want to complain that we're not given equal opportunity when really women are given more opportunity than men. And so, yeah, I would say feminism is a hate group and it's a bunch of crybaby women.
Anna, would you like to come back to that? Crybaby women feminism, apparently.
We've got a right lad with us tonight with Pearl and her opinions, haven't we? How could it possibly do harm? Pearl wouldn't do. I hope you vote. I assume you do. I hope you're not chained to the kitchen sink at home. I'm not sure if you've got a job, so I don't know very much about you, but you're probably, if there's a bloke doing the same thing as you, you're probably earning less than him. So, of course, feminism is something that it got us the vote in the first place, and it's still doing a power of good. It's just whingy men, and actually, I changed that. They're lads, they're not men.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall? Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
Welcome back. It's 4:18 and you're watching or listening to Martin Daubney on GB News on this Monday afternoon. Now, the growing row of the alleged Islamophobic comments by Lee Anderson rumbles on, and the London Mayor Sadiq Khan has accused the former Deputy Chair of the Conservative Party of fuelling the fires of hatred. Well, the Ashfield MP has conducted an interview with Patrick Christys. In fact, it took part in this very studio about an hour and a half ago. I overheard the entire thing. It's an absolute barnstormer, and that's running tonight in full on Patrick Christys' show. Tonight from 9 till 11. It kicks off at 9 p.m. on GB News. And here's a flavour of what Lee Anderson has to say.
If Mayor Khan is not coming out on TV or any media channel and saying this is disgusting what's happening on our streets in London, we should not have these graphics being flashed onto Big Ben, this is shocking, this is terrible, I will clamp down on this. If he's not saying that, then he's lost control. And you can't blame the police for this. He controls the police, that's his job.
So when Lee Anderson said those words on Friday afternoon, 5 o'clock on this show, the Martin Daubney show, it's fair to say it's been a very lively 72 hours since it's completely kicked off. The big questions are this. First of all, should Lee Anderson apologise for his comments? He didn't. And the Conservative Party withdrew the whip from Lee Anderson. He currently sits as an independent candidate, no longer a Conservative. Next, should they let him back into the party? Well, when pushed on it today, Rishi Sunak doesn't say that Lee's comments were Islamophobic. And he also, when pushed on it, doesn't rule out allowing Lee Anderson back into the Conservative Party. The question is that the right thing to do? Lots of Lee's colleagues have turned on him, he would say, but were his words a step too far? Let me know all of your comments, gbviews@gbnews.com. Now moving on to our woke army, a topic we talk about almost every day on this show. And now the decision to allow women to join frontline army fighting has been described as a failed exercise in political correctness, because government figures reveal that only 15 female recruits completed basic training for either infantry or tank units between January and September of 2023. A senior army officer says women are put off joining frontline units amid numerous allegations of rape and sexual discrimination. Well, joining me now is former NATO commander and Royal Navy officer Rear Admiral Chris Parry, CBE. Chris, always a pleasure to see you on the show. So here we are again, we're talking about diversity targets, and it seems that no matter how much they huff and they puff, young women simply aren't joining up.
Well, I mean, the life's not for everybody, Martin. It's not even for most men, to tell you the truth. So why people expect people from all walks of society to enjoy something which is a bit of a niche employment, I don't know. Life at sea, life in the air, life in the field is pretty tough. And if you want a really motivating career that makes real demands on you, then the armed forces are for you. They're not for everybody. And I think that's what the government and our recruiters need to realise.
And Chris, one statistic that leaps out of this report is that almost 50% of female recruits who started to recruit for basic training, they failed to complete the course. They weren't up to scratch.
Well, I'm afraid this is the result of, I think, rather an energetic push. Because we're not recruiting enough men, I think people think the shortfall could be made up by women. As I said, this is a tough life, and it's a life that is geared towards the sort of physical and mental, I hesitate to say skills, but aptitudes that men have. The idea that men and women are interchangeable in all these roles is ridiculous. What we need to have is all roles open to both men and women, and those that are suitable and have the aptitude for those jobs should be going into them. If we've got 15 women who are going into the infantry and the armoured corps, then that's fine. They're the ones that are suitable. It's as simple as that. Any idea that we should have quotas or any sort of percentage of people from certain ethnic groups or from women is ridiculous. We want the best people who serve our country and can defend it.
Rear Admiral Chris Parry, I think people will totally agree with everything you just said. The voice of common sense, as ever. Thank you very much for joining us on the show. It's always a pleasure. Now, farmers are on the streets of Brussels this afternoon, setting fire to tyres and blocking streets with their tractors in a protest against cheap supermarket prices. Riot police were seen firing water cannons as EU ministers arrived for meetings on the growing crisis in Brussels. And the farmers are demanding action from the European Union on free trade agreements, which they blame for damaging European farming. Well, journalist Jack Parrock was live from the protest earlier on today, and let's take a look at his footage.
Future is Europe, says the mural here in the EU quarter of Brussels behind me. But for the farmers that are clogging the streets of Brussels with their tractors today, the future is one without such stringent green laws that they feel is attacking their business, attacking their ability to earn money. You can see all up and down the roads here in Brussels, especially in the European quarter of Brussels where the EU's institutions are based. All of these tractors have completely brought the traffic and the city, especially in this area, to a standstill today. And they're doing this because a few weeks ago, when they did a similar protest, admittedly bigger, perhaps no less troublesome for the city and the mobility in the city, but certainly bigger in numbers, they succeeded. The European Union wound back some of its green targets, especially on things like pesticides, on the amount of space that farmers need to leave in order to regrow nature, a few other tinkerings on the edges of the green laws as well. But that wasn't enough for these farmers. This protest has a different atmosphere, frankly. A few weeks ago, there was a celebration. It was a sunny day, frankly. Farmers came in from all over the continent to make their views known. This protest has a more sort of serious attitude to it. It feels like they are here to say what they want to say, while EU agriculture ministers meet in a building perhaps 300 or 400 metres away from me. What we have seen as well is some relatively unsavoury scenes here in Brussels. Some of these tractors overrunning police barriers, charging through them, using their equipment on the front of their tractors to bash through some of those barriers. And the truth is that while what we've seen is a lot of support, public support for the farmers in recent weeks, and a change in some policy, the discussions that are happening online are actually starting to change slightly. People very frustrated, especially in Brussels, that the city is clogged up, but concerned about those scenes that veer on the edge of a sort of violent protest.
Great stuff, right in the thick of it. That's the way we like it on GB News. Let's cross live now to Brussels and speak to that man, Jack Parrott. Jack, our man on the ground, superb stuff, great footage. Farmers were spraying silage at European Union buildings earlier. Not for the first time, Jack. The stench of manure filling the streets of Brussels.
Yeah, it was a really different sort of protest today, Martin, to be honest with you. We saw a few weeks ago when the EU leaders were meeting. The protests, there were sort of tyres burning on the streets. A statue was pulled down outside the European Parliament, but it had a very different atmosphere. This morning, there was a real sense of sort of a clash between the authorities and the farmers, as you say. Manure was being sprayed onto the buildings. There is footage of barriers being pulled away. The Belgian police were throwing tear gas at the farmers. Somewhat ironically, that tear gas, when in those videos, was being blown back at the police rather than towards the farmers due to the direction of the wind. But it's been a very different atmosphere on the streets of Brussels today. Just in the last hour or so, we have seen the tractors start to leave the streets. It looks like the roads will start to open up again soon, but there will be the need for some sort of a clear-up effort as well. It's certainly not been that sort of peaceful, chilled protest today. The farmers have really made their point on the streets.
And Jack Parrott, a lot of people watching this would like to see the similar sort of tactic used on British streets, perhaps, against pro-Palestinian protesters. A bit of the water cannon, too bad Sadiq Khan sold them all. But back to Brussels. Last time we spoke, Jack, the protest had an immediate effect. Ursula von der Leyen did a U-turn on some of the policy around net zeros and a deal with Brazil in particular, which would flood the European market with cheap imports, particularly vegetables and fruits. The mood's different today, Jack. Will this work, or will the EU dig in against the farmers, do you feel?
No, we've heard from the agriculture ministers who are meeting in Brussels today. They're saying that they're still listening to the farmers, but there are no new announcements on a change of the Green Deals, or indeed a change to the potential trade deals that the EU is doing as well. So at the moment, it doesn't look to have had that effect, but it certainly has made a point. People in Brussels definitely know that they're here. There's a big question about how these protests go forward. At the moment, the farmers have a lot of public support. You know, we need farmers for the food. But if they continue to block cities, they've been in Madrid today as well. They've been on the Polish-German border blocking as well. We saw it, for instance, with the Gilets jaunes, the yellow vest protests in France a few years ago. Lots of public support for the need for protecting workers' rights, the need for food. But after a while, when streets are blocked, people are unable to get to their doctor's appointments, are unable to get to their, schools and stuff like that. Even if people are in favour of what the farmers are protesting for, the public sentiment can shift. It's a very interesting sort of time at the moment. This is all ahead of the June European Parliament elections, where this is all going to factor in heavily into that.
Yeah, and Jack, that was my next question, briefly, if we could. How much of an influence is this going to be, the anti-EU parties across France, across Italy, Germany, many of the EU member state countries? They are backing the farmers on this. How much, in terms of the optics, do you think that will give buoyancy to that anti-EU vote?
I think it definitely could. I think what's interesting is that these farmers aren't necessarily aligned with any political parties. Some political parties in different EU countries are adopting them in their fight. And others are perhaps more on the left-wing side of things as well, seeing this as more of a Labour issue. How that all sort of shakes down and pans out, we'll have to wait and see when the results of the elections come in.
Great stuff, Jack Parrott. Great footage in the middle of that protest. As ever, thank you very much. Live from Brussels. The tyres are burning, the manure is flying, the farmers are revolting. Great stuff, Jack Parrott, live in Brussels. Now there's lots more still to come between now and 5 o'clock, including there's growing pressure on Sir Lindsay Hoyle, with more MPs saying they have no confidence in the Speaker of the House of Commons. 77 now want to just stop Hoyle. But first, here's your latest news headlines with Polly Middlehurst.
The top stories this hour. The Prime Minister has refused to describe Lee Anderson's comments as Islamophobic after he said this morning that they were unacceptable and wrong. The former Tory Deputy Party Chairman released a statement this morning aimed at clarifying the remarks he made on this network when he suggested that Islamists had control of the Mayor of London. Admitting his words were clumsy, Lee Anderson said he was intending to highlight what he believes is Mr Khan's failure to tackle pro-Palestine protests. Writing in the Evening Standard today, Sadiq Khan described the comments as vile, racist, anti-Muslim and Islamophobic. Well, the Commons Speaker has refused an SNP application for an emergency debate on Gaza this week. That's after the Commons was plunged into chaos last week when Sir Lindsay Hoyle allowed a Labour amendment to the SNP's motion, a clear break from convention. GBNews understands the number of MPs demanding a no-confidence vote in the Speaker has now reached 77. And a new investment in transport for the north of England is apparent, with the levelling up in action, according to the Prime Minister. It's after the government outlined plans for the reallocation of funds following the cancellation of HS2's northern leg. It's going to be up to local councils to allocate the funds, but the Mayor of Greater Manchester, Andy Burnham, said the money was already promised a decade ago. And Hungary's parliament has approved a bill allowing Sweden to become a member of NATO, a significant boost to security in Northern Europe and the Baltics. The application was submitted in 2022, a historic shift in Sweden's policy following Russia's invasion of Ukraine. NATO's Secretary-General Jens Stoltenberg says the newly expanded alliance will make the world stronger. For the very latest news stories, do sign up for GB News Alerts. Try scanning that QR code on your screen right now or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Britain's newsroom, weekday mornings from 9:30.
When you listen to Nigel Farage's assessment there, do you feel that maybe this is as good as it was going to get, given that we had the pandemic and it was inevitably always going to be a bit of a mixed bag?
Well, I think it's a bit of a poor excuse from Nigel there that they haven't done it properly. The facts are, Nigel, that it's not worked. It's not going to work. Yes, we will rejoin. I mean, are we better off for it? Are they...
Can I jump in there, Charlie? We're going to rejoin under which government? Because Labour aren't going to do that, unless you don't think...
But I mean, it's going to be unavoidable not to join, because I think it's getting worse and worse for us. I mean, let me just say this. Are the NHS better because we're out of Europe? No, they're not, because they're not employing more staff. Is the building trade better off? No. Is travelling abroad or to the EU or staying in the EU, are we better off? No. Are we better off because foods rise because of the EU? No. Are we better off with imports and export? No, because they're taking longer. The overall result is that we're not better off. The killer point here is 57% of the public would now vote to remain. 33% would leave. Surely that's the telling point.
It depends on the pollster, Charlie, because we were talking to a very good pollster earlier who said there's no enthusiasm for any change in a year. Maybe 10 years, they might be thinking about it.
Belinda de Lucia, let's bring you in. I'm sure you want to react to what Charlie said.
I mean, who would have thought that the UK wanting to run its own affairs and making our politicians more accountable would be so revolutionary? EU Parliament voted a majority to get rid of the vetoes, the last remaining scraps of democracy that the EU had. Now, luckily for EU citizens at the moment, you know, it means a treaty change to actually go forward. But that is the mood. The ever closer union. We have dodged a federalised, globalist, international, power-gobbling, anti-democratic organisation, and that's worth more than a few trade and travel perks for a few wealthy people in this country.
Hear, hear. Belinda de Lucia, Charlie Mullins, great to see you both.
I'm Andrew Doyle.
Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. It's 4:36. You're watching or listening to Martin Daubney on GB News. Now, I asked you at the start of the show for your emails, and you've been getting in touch in your hundreds. And, of course, the top topic is that man, Lee Anderson. You remember 5 o'clock on Friday on this show. He said those words. Now, 72 hours later, he's still in hot water. It's still dictating the political agenda. And here's what you people have been saying. Helen says this: Lee Anderson for president. Well, that was straight to the point. Jude has said this: Lee Anderson is an utter racist oaf. So I think we can agree to disagree on that difference of opinion. Joe has said this: I'm so glad that Lee Anderson hasn't apologised. He is right with everything he has said. If you say sorry, they won't take it as an apology anyway. They'll use it against you forever. Never surrender and never apologise. Martin says this, not me, says Lee Anderson only said what we all think. It wasn't racist when he's asking what the heck is going on. Fair point. And a reminder, Patrick Christie's tonight, 9 to 11. There's an exclusive interview with Lee Anderson. He was in the studio, sat here a couple of hours ago. He did an absolute stonker of an interview. Here's a guy, many people in his position would have buckled and apologised and crumpled like a cheap suitcase. Let me guarantee you, that didn't happen. You will not want to miss that interview later on in the show. Now, shortly, a while ago, we were also joined in the studio by an Iranian activist called Niak Gorbani. He talked about the situation in Iran in 1979 and how it's mirroring what's happening on British streets now. Sarah says this: your Iranian guest just completely nailed what is happening here. The more power the Islamists get in this country, especially London, the more chance of what happened in Iran will also happen here. Well, that's a bit strong. I don't think we'll go for that kind of a takeover, but point taken. David, Martin, I have an Oxford English Dictionary app on my phone. Here is a definition for Islamophobia. It's a dislike or prejudice against Islam or Muslims, especially as a political force. So a diverse range of opinions. Thank you very much for sending them in. Now, moving on, the founder of Fair Fuel UK has delivered a petition to number 10 today with 126,000 signatures in support of keeping fuel duty frozen. Fair Fuel UK has been successfully preventing 14 years of planned fuel duty rises, getting the government to adopt Pump Watch for transparent and honest pump prices, and even influence the petrol and diesel new car sales ban being moved from a draconian 2030 target to 2035. And you can see pictures on your screen there of this man. Howard Cox joins me in the studio, the founder of Fair Fuel UK, Howard Cox. Howard, well done. The petition was so big when you handed it in. I'm surprised you hadn't put your back out, mate.
It was very, very heavy indeed. I mean, we had 2 of those, and I had the lovely and fantastic Jonathan Gullis with me, MP of Stoke-on-Trent North, who is effectively taking over the chair of our APPG for Fair Fuel UK in Parliament, and it was great. And the best thing about really today is not only the delivering the 126,000, but delivering a letter that contained 40 MPs and peers, some big heavyweights like Suella Braverman, Priti Patel, Lord Frost, David Frost. They signed it and said, hey, stop this attack on motorists into their pockets and start giving them a break in the budget next week.
And aside from fantastic numbers, 126,000, that is a lot of folks, a lot of motorists. It gives hope that there might be some common sense in this debate, because we feel continued, don't we, how there's a war on motorists. It's a one-way war of attrition and we're losing out. But you've got some political heavyweights standing up for us.
Yeah, I think so. There's a little bit of a cynic in me. It is an election year, and obviously there's 37 million motorists, and obviously they all vote. But to be fair, the people who have signed it have always consistently been behind Fair Fuel UK and what I've been trying to do for the last 15 years. And really, from my point of view, I even bumped into Minister Robert Halfon right outside the number 10, who is an absolute dream. He was Mr Fair Fuel UK in Parliament, and it was great. And we're going to have a pint again soon, but he can't help us visually because obviously he's in government. But the most important thing for Wednesday week is he's got to wake up and realise and make this budget a driver's budget. Wake up and realise drivers should be seen as the commercial heartbeat of the economy and a solution to getting out of the cost of living crisis, rather than actually just seeing them as pure cash cows. So fingers crossed.
Well, Howard, a lot of people watching the show would agree that the cash cow is being milked dry. Do you think you're going to get a result?
Yes, I think so. It would be economic and political suicide for one to put it up by 5p. The Office of Budget Inaccuracy, responsibility. I think I've said that a few times before. Now I'm going to continue to say it. They are saying that we've got to put it up 5p to actually pay for the national insurance cuts we've recently so-called enjoyed. But yeah, I'm optimistic. I just think, come on, let's go for it. I've actually gone even further. Cut it by 20p. That's right, 20 pence per litre. And do it for 6 months to see what happens to not only the economy, because it would actually blossom beyond belief if we did have that cut in fuel duty, but more importantly, it would deliver votes to the Tories.
Howard, as I've got you here, can I ask you to pass comment on what's been going on with Lee Anderson? Obviously, it's kicked off his comments about Sidi Khan. Do you think he should apologise?
I personally don't think he should apologise. The only thing is, there's an elephant in this room which we're ignoring, and he brought it out in I think, the wrong way. I think his words were actually, inappropriate. But in terms of actually what's happening out there, it's a big worry. You had an egg thrown at you and all that things, projected onto the Big Ben. All that sort of thing, with police just standing and letting them get away with it. There is an issue, and when I become Mayor of London, I want to bring all these parties together and say, how do we solve this? We've got to do something about it in a constructive way. And maybe Lee may have second thoughts in the way he delivered it, but in terms of the sentiment, I think people agree with him.
And this debate really, Howard, was about the fact that the Metropolitan Police Force simply don't seem to be upholding law and order with fear or favour. That's why I was pelted with eggs and God knows what else. I didn't have a problem with the protesters. It was like, why aren't you arresting that guy who's wearing a full face balaclava? Why aren't you taking that projector down? Why aren't you getting that person who's got an anti-Semitic placard? There is a feeling that the police are taking sides, two-tier policing.
And yet we saw that guy who was actually objected to some of the Palestinian marches the other day. He had a flag, and to cut a long story short, he was arrested. He was moved out of the way, and all he was saying to me, look, Hamas are terrorists, which is a fact. And so, I wish Lee well, and it's a shame he's lost the whip, but who knows, he may be part of reform one day.
Well, that's a tantalising thought to dribble out there. Thank you very much, Howard Cox. Fairful UK, and let's hope we get a result for the motorists at the budget. Keep the sterling work. I know you've been beavering away for absolutely donkish years. Cheers. Now, still to come, the growing pressure on Sir Lindsay Hoyle as more MPs say they've lost confidence in the Speaker of the House of Commons. 77 have now signed the petition to just stop Hoyle. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. Weekdays from midday.
Elon Musk has announced that the first patients to receive a groundbreaking brain implant from Neuralink is recovering well.
This is all a bit odd. The product, called telepathy, uses a robot to surgically place a computer chip in a region of the brain that controls movement.
Yes, Elon Musk says that the first goal is to enable people to control a phone or a computer just by thinking. He says that initial tests show promising signs of brain activity, meaning that patients with paralysis could one day overcome their conditions.
Not sure about this one. Joining us to discuss this breakthrough is applied futurist Tom Cheesewright. Tom, this sounds, slightly terrifying.
I certainly think a lot of people will be thinking this is something out of a sci-fi horror rather than reality. But this is a technology that's been a long time coming. We've been developing direct brain-computer interfaces for a long time, mostly for the sort of therapeutic reasons that are the initial goal, at least, of Elon Musk's Neuralink, to allow people who are perhaps quadriplegic to have direct control via their brains of initially a smartphone and maybe ultimately artificial limbs or a wheelchair.
It does seem fascinating how quickly this technology is moving on. I saw demonstrations perhaps a year or two ago of people playing a very simple Pong game just by thinking, moving sort of one line on a screen up and down. This seems like potentially there has been a breakthrough that means far more complex things can be controlled just by thinking.
Well, there's lots of different aspects to this technology. The initial attempts to interface with the brain used actually quite thick prongs almost that went into the brain, and they were quite solid, and so if the brain moved, they could potentially cause damage.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria Di Piero, bringing you
PMQs live here on GB News. Every Wednesday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions when Rishi Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer go head-to-head in the House of Commons.
We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQs live here on GB News, Britain's election channel.
Welcome back. It's 4:47. You're watching or listening to Martin Daubney on GB News. Before the break, I was joined by Howard Cox. He was the London mayoral candidate for the Reform Party. But now let's move on. MPs demanding a no-confidence vote, and House of Commons Speaker Lindsay Hoyle has now climbed to 80. This is after the Commons was thrown into absolute turmoil when Sir Lindsay Hoyle last week decided to hear a Labour amendment to an SNP motion calling for that immediate ceasefire in Gaza. Well, let's cross now to our political editor, Christopher Hope. Chris, welcome to the show. You've been a busy bee today so far. A superb interview with Lee Anderson you did with Patrick Christys earlier, coming up at 9 p.m. tonight. But let's get back to the topic we perhaps should have been talking about before Lee Anderson, in his usual way, took the conversation into a different direction, and that is the continuing pressure on Lindsay Hoyle. What's the latest?
Yes, well, thanks, Martin. Afternoon to you. Overnight, there were 71 MPs who signed the motion of no confidence in Speaker Lindsay Hoyle. That's now gone up to 80 today, so an increase of 9. 3 Tory MPs out of their name and 6 SNP MPs. And an early day motion is like a kind of petition. So it just says it's really a way of just gauging the temperature of feeling in the House of Commons. Not much more than that. But 80 is a lot. It's nearly 4 times as many as signed a motion, which resulted shortly afterwards in Michael Martin resigning at the height of the MP expenses scandal. So 80 is a number. Now, I was talking to people late on Friday. They said if it goes to 97, that's 15% of all MPs, then Lindsay Hoyle's position will be very hard to hold on to for him. There's no real hard and fast rule here with confidence. It's a kind of, as authority leeches away. I should say that if you're in the government, you can't sign it. So MPs and PPSs don't sign these motions. That's 150 or so Tory MPs can't sign it. So if you take away the numbers who can't sign it, 80 looks like quite a big proportion.
And Chris, astonishingly, people might be staggered to understand that the SNP are pushing for a rerun of last Wednesday's Gaza ceasefire debate. And will that add even more pressure onto Lindsay Hoyle?
That's right. I'm getting some updates on my phone while I'm speaking to you. That the government, there'll be a statement tomorrow on Gaza, but Commons Speaker Lindsay Hoyle has said that application for an emergency debate on Gaza should not succeed. So he's decided on the standing orders he won't change the rules for the SNP, and that may explain why 6 more SNP MPs have signed that motion today. Clearly, there's no way of ameliorating the issue here with the SNP, and I think, given they are the third biggest party in the House of Commons amongst MP but being represented, is a problem, because if you're the Speaker, you've got to govern the House of Commons for all MPs. If a big group like the SNP don't support you, it's hard to see how you hang on.
And Chris, a lot of people might think that's the right thing to do. I mean, we saw absolute calamity on Wednesday, and the reverberations will probably last for years when we look back about the mob outside, as we discussed all last week, affecting what was going on inside. Do you think Sir Lindsay has done the right thing to not have a rerun of this debate?
I'm not sure. I mean, I've been advocating for a bit now that he had to really balance up the ledger and say something about the Labour Party. The Labour put him under some pressure last Wednesday to allow a vote on their policy on Gaza rather than their MPs voting for the SNP or the government's motion. So it carries on. And we heard Lee Anderson overnight. He lost the whip on Saturday, and I've interviewed him with Patrick Christis tonight to run in his show 9 to 11. And I think it's very, very newsy. If you want to know about the future, the Tory party of Lee Anderson's future, the Reform Party of the Tories, I do advise you to tune in. It's going to be quite a belter.
Yeah, and without giving anything away, I overheard the entire thing. I was sat next door. It's an absolute barnstormer of an interview, but not giving any of Patrick's exclusive away. They have to wait till 9 o'clock for that. Now the dust has settled on this. Lee seems to be doubling down. He's been adamant in the statement they released via GB News earlier. He has no intention of apologising. Do you think Rishi Sunak, who seems to have dodged the issue today, he hasn't condemned the comments as Islamophobia, he hasn't definitely said there's no way back for Lee. What do you think is the most likely chain of events moving forward, Chris?
Well, I had thought they wanted Lee Anderson back in the party. He's quite an asset. He's away of those in the stronghold, the south. They like to talk to Lee Anderson. He's always touring around these associations to understand who else they can speak to and why do these people in the north of England, why would a former Labour councillor like Lee Anderson become a Tory MP and in fact vote Tory for himself for the first time. But I think today there's been a retrenching, a hardening of positions. And you heard earlier Lee Anderson told me for GB News, if you're wrong, apologising is not a sign of weakness but a sign of strength. But he says, but when you think you're right, you should never apologise because to do so would be a sign of weakness. And it looks to me like I think the Tory party is trying to not have a go at Lee Anderson and push him into a position, but he is in that position right now. It's hard to see how he comes back to the party, and I'm surprised by that. And we heard remarks overnight also, or today, from the London Mayor, Sadiq Khan. He's making clear he thinks it's all on Rishi Sunak. Be firmer on Islamophobia in the Tory party, call it out, and he's not doing so. So it's moving away from Lee Anderson, but I don't see how he gets back at this stage.
Which begs the question, Chris. Nigel Farage has been flashing his garter, so to speak, saying that he would be welcome in the Reform Party. Richard Tice issuing a statement earlier, being slightly coy, but we all know that they would love to have Lee Anderson join in the Reform Party. Do you think a defection, a spectacular defection, could be on the cards?
Well, of course, Nigel Farage is in America broadcasting for GB News at the moment, but Richard Tice, the leader, he put out a 311-word, I would call it an invitation to Lee Anderson to join his party. He made very clear he supported what Lee Anderson said. And at the very end, he just said, I do not and will not give a running commentary on any discussions I have with any MPs, but those MPs have my number. Now, let me tell you, Richard Tice and Lee Anderson are on speaking terms. They neither will say they're talking to each other, but they each have each other's phone number. I wonder whether that was an invitation to join the Reform Party. We'll wait and see.
OK, Chris Hope, as ever, superb stuff. Now, that is the biggest political story of the moment. We'll have plenty more of that, of course, on today's show. Regarding that Lee Anderson row, will this be the final straw for Rishi Sunak's party? Leaked WhatsApp messages from the Conservative Party. They seem to be very concerned that Lee Anderson, their Red Wall Rottweiler, is their connection to the working classes. Do they need him? Can they put their differences to one side? Or did he simply go too far this time? Is it curtains for Lee Anderson? We'll have all of that, including a sneak preview from that fantastic interview with Patrick Christis tonight, shown at 9 o'clock. We'll have that after this. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, Britain's news channel.
A brighter outlook with Bob Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, good afternoon. Welcome to your latest GB News weather update with me, Annie, from the Met Office. It should be staying dry for many areas through the rest of the day, with some late sunshine to come. However, it will be a cold night tonight. That's as high pressure is building in from the south and west, so that will settle things down through the rest of the night. However, in the north and west, we'll start to see some thicker cloud and rain arrive by tomorrow morning. So the winds should ease tonight, allowing for temperatures to dip down quite early on, and we should see some mist and fog developing mainly across central and south southeastern areas. That could be quite slow to clear tomorrow morning. But away from any mist and fog, it will turn frosty, particularly for inland areas of Wales, England, northern England as well. Further north and west, though, we'll see some wet weather arrive by tomorrow morning. Quite a blustery band of rain will push through around rush hour for northwestern areas of Scotland and into Northern Ireland too. That could bring some snow to the high ground of Scotland, and then that rain will push into parts of northern England and parts of Wales as well to bring a wet afternoon for these areas. Further south and east, though, it should stay dry, but it will be a much cloudier day than today, and temperatures around average for the time of year, 7 or 8 degrees. Through Wednesday, we'll see another probably misty and murky start to the day before we see the next batch of rain arrive from the west, but this time this will pick up the temperatures. It will turn milder through the course of Wednesday and into Thursday, with further rain arriving into parts of the north and west. It looks a little bit colder to end the week again, though. See you later.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
The Camilla Tominey Show. Sunday mornings from 9:30.
We had Grant Shapps on last week. He was talking about how defence spending is now creeping up to 2.25% of GDP. Ben Wallace's predecessor suggested it should be 3%. We hear that we've got the smallest army, I think, since the Napoleonic Wars. Numbers are down. There's a question as to whether we can staff frigates in the Red Sea. Why haven't we sent aircraft carriers? What's your impression of the situation?
Well, I don't think it matters how much you spend, it's how effectively you spend it. And we spend it very ineffectively. We have lots of scandals about defence spending. And I think partly because of the monopoly position of some of our defence suppliers, we don't get good value and we don't get reliability. This latest story in the Telegraph is that HMS Diamond, which is our ship, which is out there defending the Red Sea, doesn't have the capability of firing a missile from the ship to the land, so it can't participate in the attacks on the Houthis. So in order that we can participate in the attacks, we're flying RAF aircraft from Cyprus, which is a very long way away. When I was Defence Secretary, I ordered cruise missiles for our nuclear-powered, but not nuclear-armed submarines. And I think we have 6 or possibly 7 of those. But last autumn, it was reported that 5 of those were out of commission, were not available. We have about 21 aggressive surface ships. So we've got 2 aircraft carriers, then we've got frigates, and we've got destroyers. But at any one time, you can count on about half of those not being available because they're under refit or whatever. So we have a minimal surface fleet now. And for whatever reason, it doesn't seem that we're able to deploy a submarine to the area that can fire cruise missiles. Our 2 aircraft carriers, built at enormous expense, are sitting in Portsmouth.
Which seems to most people ludicrous,
well,
at least with what's going on.
It doesn't seem ludicrous to me.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, it's 5 p.m. and a very happy Monday afternoon to you. Welcome to the Martin Daubney Show on GB News, broadcasting live from the heart of Westminster, all across the UK. This hour, we're going to hear Sadiq Khan's stinging criticism of Lee Anderson. The London mayor's accused him of pouring fuel on the fires of hatred. We'll also hear from Lee Anderson, the man himself, because he's spoken exclusively to GB News. And he does not hold back on fighting his corner and hitting back. The war of words coming up from the Red Wall Rottweiler shortly. Also, as Rishi Sunak condemns his word as wrong, what impact will Lee Anderson's comments have on how voters view the Tories as we head towards that all-important general election? Is he toxic or is he essential to the Conservatives? And also, Generation Sick Note. People in their 20s are now more likely to be out of work due to ill health than those in their 40s. The study finds young people claim a mental disorder more than any other age group. That's all coming up on the show. So welcome to the show, and as usual, please get in touch all the usual ways. gbviews@gbnews.com. Friday at 5 o'clock. It all kicked off this time 3 days ago. 72 hours is a long time in politics when Lee Anderson said those comments which have now been called Islamophobic, racist by his opponents. But a lot of people have come out and said Lee Anderson is just speaking what a lot of ordinary people are saying, the length and breadth of the land. Should Lee Anderson apologise? Should the Conservatives let him back in? They've, of course, taken the whip from him. Should Lee Anderson defect to Reform? Can the party get by without him? Or is this resignation shivering him like this the final nail in the coffin for the Conservatives? Get in touch, all the usual ways. But first, here's your latest new headlines with Polly Middlehurst.
It's 2 minutes past 5. The top story from the GB newsroom is that the Prime Minister has refused to describe Lee Anderson's comments as Islamophobic after he said this morning that they were unacceptable and wrong. The former Tory Deputy Chairman released a statement earlier on aimed at clarifying the remarks he'd made on this network when he suggested that Islamists had got control of the Mayor of London. Admitting his words were clumsy, Lee Anderson said he was intending to highlight what he believes is Mr Khan's failure to tackle pro-Palestine protests. Writing in the Evening Standard today, the London Mayor described the comments as vile, racist, anti-Muslim and Islamophobic. Rishi Sunak says the appropriate action has been taken.
Most important thing is that the words were wrong. They were ill-judged, they were unacceptable, and that's what I believe, and that's why the whip has been suspended. And I think everyone can see that tensions are already running high, and what I want to do, I think what the country wants to see, is the heat taken out of this debate, and I think that's the right thing to do.
Rishi Sunak, well, the leader of the Labour Party says it's all the consequence of a weak Prime Minister presiding over a divided party.
It's Islamophobia, and the Prime Minister should call it out for what it is. The reason he won't is because he's so weak. They're divided, they're chaotic, and if they're re-elected, we're going to have 5 more years of this. It is only Labour now that can unite the country, bring people together, turn a page on this and actually usher in the sort of society, the sort of future that people desperately want. But the Prime Minister lacks the strength. He's too weak. He can't call it out for what it is.
Sir Keir Starmer. Well, the leader of the Scottish National Party in Westminster, Stephen Flynn, says the Speaker of the House has broken his word after he refused an SNP application for an emergency debate on Gaza. And that's after the Commons was plunged into chaos last week when Sir Lindsay Hoyle allowed a Labour amendment to the SNP's motion, a clear break from long-standing convention. Mr Flynn described the decision as outrageous and said the public would be also outraged. The number of MPs demanding a no-confidence vote in the Speaker, Sir Lindsay Hoyle, has now reached 80. Now, a member of the US military who set himself on fire outside the Israeli embassy in Washington at the weekend has died. It's understood he was wearing military fatigues and shouting "Free Palestine" as he streamed the apparent protest online. More information is expected to be announced later after the military has notified the man's family. A transgender cat killer has been jailed for life and told to serve a minimum of 24 years for the murder of Jorge Martin Carreño. 26-year-old Scarlett Blake targeted him as a part of a fantasy inspired by a television documentary. She hit him on the head as he walked home from a night out in Oxford in 2021, pushed him into a nearby river where he drowned. His murder came 4 months after she live-streamed herself killing a cat. The Prime Minister says new investment in transport for the north of England and the Midlands is levelling up in action. That's after the government outlined plans for the reallocation of funds following the cancellation of HS2's northern leg. It'll be up to local councils to allocate those funds. The Mayor of Greater Manchester, Andy Burnham, dismissing the plan, though, saying the money had already been promised 10 years ago. The Transport Secretary, Mark Harper, says the government is empowering local communities.
2.5 billion for the north, 2.2 billion for the Midlands. That money is going to local councils. It's for them to spend on the local priorities that they set, that they think are important to their local communities, and they'll reach those conclusions by consulting those communities, but also talking, very importantly, to their members of parliament about what those important local transport priorities are. The whole point is it's not for ministers to set those priorities, it's for councils to set them. We think those decisions are better made closer to the people that are going to benefit from them.
Mark Harper. Now, right outside the EU offices, farmers are on the streets of Brussels, setting fire to tyres and blocking streets with their tractors in a protest against cheap supermarket prices. Riot police were seen firing water cannon as EU ministers arrived for meetings on the growing crisis. The farmers are demanding action from the European Union on free trade agreements, which they blame for damaging European farming. It's the latest in a series of similar protests across the bloc, with the EU already moving to weaken some of its green policies. Those are the latest stories. For the very latest updates, sign up to GB News Alerts. Scan that QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Great stuff, Polly. Thank you as ever. And now moving on to our top story today, of course, it's the growing row over the alleged Islamophobic comments by Lee Anderson. And London Mayor Sadiq Khan has accused the former deputy chair of the Conservative Party of fuelling the fires of hatred. Well, the Ashfield MP has conducted an exclusive interview with Patrick Christys, which is to run in full on Patrick's show tonight at 9 p.m. on GB News. And here's a sneak preview of what Lee Anderson has to say.
If Mayor Khan is not coming out on TV or any media channel and saying this is disgusting what's happening on our streets in London, we should not have these graphics being flashed onto Big Ben. This is shocking, this is terrible, I will clamp down on this. If he's not saying that, then he's lost control. And you can't blame the police for this. He controls the police. That's his job.
Yeah, in a wide-ranging interview, it's safe to say that the Red Wall Rottweiler does not take the knee. He's doubling down. You will not want to miss it. It's absolutely explosive, that interview. 9 p.m. tonight on the Patrick Christys show. But in the last few minutes, London Mayor Sadiq Khan has had this to say.
It's been more than 2 days now since the senior Conservative made comments that were clearly racist, anti-Muslim and Islamophobic, and still no firm condemnation from the leader of the Conservative Party, the Prime Minister. Look, what we know over the last 4 months has been a massive increase in anti-Semitism. There's also been a massive increase in Islamophobia, anti-Muslim hatred and racism. And that's why it's so important to be careful with language. There are tropes that are clearly anti-Semitic, we call them out. There are tropes that are clearly Islamophobic and anti-Muslim, they should be called out as well. What this man said were racist, Islamophobic and anti-Muslim. I'm bewildered why Rishi Sunak and the Cabinet are refusing to call this out. He called them unacceptable and wrong. I'm unclear why Rishi Sunak says these comments are unacceptable. I'm unclear why he says they're wrong. I'm unclear why the Deputy Prime Minister thinks he should apologise. They should say what the problem is. The problem is you have a senior Conservative saying things that are clearly racist, anti-Muslim and Islamophobic. That's leading to an environment where anti-Muslim crime is spiralling, and what they're doing is pouring petrol on the flames of Islamophobia.
What do you make of Lee Anderson's comment that his remarks were clumsy?
Well, look, we can all make clumsy remarks. When you repeat a trope that is Islamophobic, that is racist, anti-Muslim and Islamophobic, we wouldn't put up with, we'd rightly call out tropes that are anti-Semitic. I've called out over the last 5-6 years members of the Labour Party who've said things that are clearly anti-Semitic or repeated anti-Semitic tropes. Racism is racism, whether the victim is Jewish or Muslim.
And you're in no doubt that what Lee Anderson said in...
OK, well, that's London Mayor Sadiq Khan not mincing his words at all. Let's get some reaction to those words now, because I'm joined by the Deputy Chair of the Conservative Muslim Forum, Navid Ashka. Navid, welcome to the show. You may have overheard London Mayor Sadiq Khan there, calling Lee Anderson's comments vile, anti-Muslim, racist and Islamophobic, of course. Now, as the Deputy Chair of the Conservative Muslim Forum, what's your take?
Hi, Martin. So obviously it's been a very, very busy weekend. And look, as far as I'm concerned, the decision by the Prime Minister was correct. I've heard what Lee had to say today as well. And, you know, I'm glad that Lee has said that his words were clumsy and that, you know, he agrees that the vast majority of British Muslims are hard-working people. UK citizens make fantastic contributions to our society and their religion should not be blamed on a tiny minority of extremists. I just wish that politicians would be clear when they are saying things about, they should blanket, you know, about Islam or Muslims, because that takes in every single citizen of this country. There's 4 million Muslims in this country, and a majority of them are hardworking. And where it comes to extremists, absolutely, they should be called out and the security services should deal with them. Not a single person that I know in my circle in my lifetime has ever said that they are happy with extremists. They cause untold terror and they cause untold grief, no matter where it is in the country or where it is internationally. There's no place for extremists, no matter where they come from. But Lee Anderson, I just, you know, I hope he had been more clearer when he made those comments. And I'm sure when he made those comments, he didn't think that it would gain as much traction as they did. I'm glad the Prime Minister came out this morning and said that, you know, the words were unacceptable. And, you know, we are here.
And Rishi Sunak, the Prime Minister, was very clear he wouldn't say that Lee Anderson's words were Islamophobic. And as the Deputy Chair of the Conservative Muslim Forum, would you be happy to accept Lee Anderson back into the Conservative Party?
Look, Lee Anderson's been suspended, and look, already today he's been clearer with what he was saying, and he's not been expelled from the party. I'm sure Lee's a very good member of Parliament, and he does fantastic work for his constituency. So absolutely, there's always got to be a door left open. I would love to have Lee to stay in the party and work with ourselves and work with other British Muslim as peers, as fellow colleagues in Parliament to understand, you know, maybe the wording was not correct what he used, and I'm sure he understands that now.
OK, Navid, a lot of people have been getting in touch with us here saying Lee Anderson was only saying what many, many people believe. And isn't this the problem? It started with the very real perception that the streets weren't being policed with fear or favour on Wednesday night. There was bedlam in Parliament Square, bedlam which impacted what was going on inside Parliament, a very real feeling that the mob outside is poisoning our party political atmosphere inside. And isn't this actually, OK, in his usual subtle way, it's about as subtle as a note tied to a house brick. But Navid, we all have a conversation about Islamist extremism, which actually most politicians and the media just try and sweep under the carpet.
No, we can't just target just Muslims or people, British Muslims going out to protest. Protest is something that's enshrined in law, and you know, as a democratic country, all protests are allowed. But none of those protests should turn into violence. None of those protests should turn into extremism. And if there is elements in those protests, those people should be picked up. We have fantastic technology in the UK, where even after the event, cameras can pick people up, digital technology, social media, etc., can pick people up if they're holding placards, if they're doing things which are not acceptable or any crime. And then after these protests, plenty of people are picked up, but a majority of those people are law-abiding citizens. So we can't say because 2 or 3 extremists were picked up that the whole 10,000, 15, 20,000, how many people were on those protests. It's no different to people who are doing, the Stop the Oil protests or the Greenpeace protests. And as you know, they're also now using more and more extreme tactics. Protesting is allowed in this country, so we need to live with that. I totally disagree with most of these protests when they're blocking the carriageway and police can't get through, ambulances can't get through, they've glued their hands to the ground, etc. I totally disagree with those types of protests.
Navi, getting back on point to the Islamist extremists as they've been labelled, you talk about the vast majority, correctly, of normal, law-abiding, hard-working Muslims not being any part of this. Do you feel frustrated as a Muslim that these people seem to take all the oxygen out of the conversation? They seem to get all the bandwidth. And I'll put it to you bluntly, why aren't more Muslims speaking out against the extremists to sort of say, we're not like them, they aren't us, we don't want them either?
Because there isn't a platform for most, British Muslims to speak out against these things. So I think you're absolutely right. There needs to be more of a narrative for more people to come out. And I think the security services need to up their game to pick out these people from society, no matter how underground they may be, because nowadays a lot of the stuff is done online. But I'm sure the security services have the capability and they've got the people and the technology to pick these people up. We do not want extremists in our midst, no matter which culture, which ideology they represent. I'm open and clear about that. We want an open society, a robust, safe society where we all live. British Muslims have been in the UK for the last, 6, 7 decades. My own family, granddad arrived here in 1950s up in Scotland. And they've made a fantastic life for themselves here, highly educated, contributing to society. And that's what a majority of Muslims want. The Conservative Party is not a racist party. Individuals within it might harbour some thoughts, and sometimes it might be, from the information they've received at a high end, something that might have happened to them personally, etc. But on the whole, the Conservative Party is a fantastic home for British Muslims. Their values align exactly with British Muslims. There's no other party here that those values align with. We like to own our own home. We like to be educated. We like to be entrepreneurial. We like to be business orientated. We like to be safe. We like to work. We're not people who want to be sat there on the dole and benefiting, sponging off the benefit system. So the Conservative values are exactly aligning, and this is what the last 15 years the Conservative Muslim Forum has been doing to engage with the government, and we engage fantastically. We have fantastic access to CCHQ and to number 10 Downing Street, and we engage regularly with them. And up and down the country, Conservative MPs are doing a fantastic job of engagement. Up in Scotland, the Scottish Conservatives do a fantastic job of engaging with the Muslims communities.
Navid Ashka, forthright, frank, from the heart. I want to thank you, for saying that. I mean, that is what we need to be hearing. We need to be hearing this moderate debate, this sensible debate, this inclusive debate. Absolutely excellent. Thank you very much for joining us, Deputy Chair of the Conservative Muslim Forum, Navid Ashka. That was excellent. Thank you very much. Now, Rishi Sunak has defended his position and how he has dealt with the controversy.
Well, I've been very clear that what Lee said was wrong, it was unacceptable, and that's why we suspended the whip. And it's important that everybody, but particularly elected politicians, are careful with their words and do not inflame tensions. The most important thing is that the words were wrong. They were ill-judged, they were unacceptable, and that's what I believe, and that's why the whip has been suspended. And I think everyone can see that tensions are already running high, and what I want to do, I think what the country wants to see, is the heat taken out of this debate, and I think that's the right thing to do.
And that was the Prime Minister Rishi Sunak earlier on the ongoing Lee Anderson story. Of course, we'll have lots more of that, and there's loads of it on our website. And thanks to you, GBNews.com is the fastest growing national news website in the country. It's got all the breaking news and the brilliant analysis that you've come to expect from us here at GB News. Now, coming up, what does this whole sorry crisis say about MPs' safety? Well, I'll be speaking to a security expert to answer how MPs are keeping safe against the tide of extremism. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Lee Anderson's Real World, Fridays from 7 p.m.
Dr. Jane Jones, who's the clinical lead for Care After Combat, Jane, thanks for coming. And just tell me a little bit about your organisation. What do you do?
OK, well, thank you for having me here so we can talk about Care After Combat. So we are an organisation, a charity, who work into the prison system, working with military veterans who've somehow got involved with the justice system. And
so there's quite a high population of ex-service men and women in our prisons. Why is that, do you think?
So 2014, the government did a review of who was resident in UK prisons, and what they found were that military veterans are the highest occupational group, and this obviously raises some concerns. So the government wanted to do something about that, and so they supported Care After Combat initially just as a scoping exercise, really, to see if there was any way we could help these men and women actually, you know, understand the problems that led to offending behaviour and go on to lead successful lives.
So what sort of offending behaviour are we talking typically for people that's in prison that's actually served in our armed forces?
Primarily, it's violence.
Yeah.
So that is the highest offence that we work with.
Okay.
But of course, the military, as with everybody else, it's the full range of offending behaviour.
OK, so we're in a pub, Jane, Dr. Jane, and I guess for some people, you know, the odd tip of alcohol is good, a bit of fun of a weekend, relax, let your hair down. But for some people, alcohol is not always their best friend, and I guess that plays a part in some of your veterans that end up inside.
Absolutely. So, speaking from my own experience, a good 2/3 of the people I work with have some kind of mental health problem or mental health difficulty, struggling to either adapt into civilian life or with some of the traumas they've experienced during service. People might self-medicate with alcohol to manage some of those thoughts and feelings.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Have a great Saturday night with me, Leo Curse, on the Saturday Night Showdown. It's a crazy world out there, so come and make fun of it with me, my panel of comedians, and a couple of people who actually know what they're talking about. The Saturday Night Showdown is your front row ticket to the clown show every Saturday, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. It's 5:22. You're watching or listening to Martin Daubney on GB News. Now, the Speaker has blocked the SNP's latest attempt to hold another Commons debate on Gaza following the chaotic vote, of course, about that conflict on Wednesday night. And there was uproar in the Commons when Speaker Sir Lindsay Hoyle allowed MPs to vote on a Labour amendment to the SNP's ceasefire motion. And that meant the SNP motion was not voted on, prompting the party to say Sir Lindsay should quit as Speaker. Pardon me. Let's get the thoughts now of security and intelligence expert at the University of Buckingham, Professor Anthony Glees. Anthony, what does all this say about the ongoing danger to our MPs?
Well, there is clearly an ongoing serious danger to our MPs. We've had 2 MPs assassinated in recent times. One MP almost assassinated. And then just a few weeks ago, we had Mike Freer, a junior justice minister, for goodness sake, had his office firebombed. And it seems by people who'd also cased out other offices, including the office of Sir Keir Starmer. So when you look at all these things in the round and add it to the scenes in the Commons and the words of our Prime Minister, who said that MPs are being intimidated, you really do think that things have changed to such an extent in this country that we really do need to consider the security of our representatives with a seriousness which we've not shown so far. I mean, that sort of bear garden in the House of Commons on Wednesday evening is actually extremely significant because it mirrors what looks like broken Britain and the disintegration of civil society.
But Anthony, what would that security look like? I mean, if you're talking about a personal security detail for every MP, that would be a huge cost to the public purse.
Well, I mean, in a sense, you have to pay what it costs. It might not mean that every MP needs their own protection officer, but clearly we need to do something, because what goes on in Parliament, and indeed the role of MPs, is the beating heart of our democracy. And if that can be disrupted, in this case by pro-Palestinian supporters, then we no longer have the democracy that we hold so dear. So something's got to be done. Now, I think this is so serious that it's worthwhile recalling that one of MI5's statutory duties is to protect our democracy from those who seek to undermine it by political means. And this is in the 1989 Security Service Act. Those people who organised the protests on Wednesday, those people who shone that Hamas slogan, "From the river to the sea," on Elizabeth Tower and Big Ben, they should have been arrested. And I don't want to get into the business of Lee Anderson's comments, because they could be libelous. What I think he was pointing to was the fact that the Mayor of London, who has a special responsibility for policing in the metropolis, does not seem to have intervened or asked the police to consider intervening, because they don't take orders from him, but to ask the police to intervene to stop the crowds, intimidatory crowds. And we know one of the organisers actually said he wanted so many pro-Palestinian demonstrators to get to Parliament that they'd have to shut the doors on them. Of course, in one sense, I think all decent people in Britain are pro-Palestinian. You've got to understand that the images, what we're seeing, they're not acceptable to any of us. But equally, it's not acceptable to any of us that Hamas should have had that jihadist terrorist raid on Israel, killed over 1,000 people, 100 people in whatever it was, in a most brutal way. And to use their slogan to intimidate MPs is not acceptable.
OK, we have to leave it there. Thank you very much for joining us, Professor Anthony Gleeson. Excellent as ever. Now, a new report says young people are increasingly blaming mental health problems for being jobless, with a number of 18 to 24-year-olds who are economically inactive due to health issues more than doubling in the past decade, rising from 93,000 to a staggering 190,000. Now, 2/3 report suffering poor mental health, and 4 in 10 list it as the main reason for not working. We'll discuss this now. I'm joined by Lucy Beresford, broadcaster and psychotherapist. Lucy, thanks for joining us on the show. A lot of people have been saying this is an example of snowflake Britain, of work-shy Britain. The young people in particular are buckling. Or is it actually we have a more open relationship with mental health and therefore more young people are presenting? What's the truth?
Well, it's partly that second option that you presented, which is that we are much more, in a way, mental health literate. We have the language, we see it portrayed in our culture. We have people from the heir to the throne downwards talking about the importance of discussing your mental health. And there are too many of us who have experienced the downside of repressed feelings and perhaps being raised by a generation who were brought up to have that stiff upper lip. But then the legacy of that is that you're not necessarily processing the things that have happened to you. But there is a couple of other things that have been going on for this particular cohort. And this study is looking really at people under the age of 20. But in particular, it's identifying that it's people of that age group who are not in ongoing employment or education, who are particularly vulnerable. And I think we have to recognise two big factors: social media and the rise of smartphone use, and also more recently the pandemic and COVID, and the way that that really weakened people's social skills and coping mechanisms.
Well, and also, Lucy, a lot of us were saying at the time that the pandemic and the payouts people were getting broke the bond between rewarding work, and we became reliant on handouts all of a sudden. Isn't that part of the problem? A lot of young people now got a taste for getting money for free, and now they quite like it.
Well, it's funny. There was another study that came out a couple of weeks ago which identified that there is, again, from this generation, a much greater increase of people who say that they were happier during lockdown and to compare to their life now. And that's not just necessarily about furlough or the money, because again, we're talking about people who weren't in employment back then. So they didn't even have that contract to begin with. That, as you say, that bond hadn't been established. But it's more about the way in which social skills that we learn at school and that we also develop in the workplace, things like sharing, things like compromise, things like getting to the office in time. Actually, there are a lot of people who don't have those skills. They don't know how to function in a world that demands that of you. So it's not necessarily their fault, but they don't necessarily think that that is the way that their life should be going forward.
OK, fascinating stuff. Thanks for joining us, Lucy Beresford, broadcaster and psychotherapist. I just think that, a pound note earned has so much more value than a pound note given to you. That's what I teach my kids. That's what my parents taught me. Get you back into it. And working is good for your mental health. Getting free money isn't. There's lots more still to come between now and 6 o'clock, and concern has been raised in Stoke-on-Trent, where a Conservative fundraising event was disrupted by some pro-Palestinian protesters. I'll be talking to a councillor who was at that meeting to share his terrifying ordeal. But first, here's your latest news headlines with Polly Middlehurst.
The top stories this hour. The London Mayor Sadiq Khan is accusing Lee Anderson of pouring petrol onto the flames of Islamophobia. He was speaking after the Prime Minister described Lee Anderson's remarks as unacceptable and wrong, but refused to say they were Islamophobic. And earlier, the former Tory Deputy Chairman Lee Anderson released a statement attempting to clarify his comments, where he suggested Islamists had got control of the Mayor of London. He admitted his words were clumsy and said he intended to highlight what he believed is the London Mayor's failure to tackle pro-Palestine protests. Meanwhile, the leader of the SNP in Westminster, Stephen Flynn, says the Speaker has broken his word after he refused an SNP application for an emergency debate on Gaza. It's after the Commons was plunged into chaos last week when Sir Lindsay Hoyle allowed a Labour amendment to the SNP's motion. Mr Flynn described today's decision as outrageous. The number of MPs demanding a no-confidence vote in the Speaker has now reached 80. And Hungary's parliament has approved a bill allowing Sweden to become a member of NATO, a significant boost to security in Northern Europe and the Baltics. It's also a historic shift in Sweden's policy, coming after Russia's invasion of Ukraine. NATO Secretary-General Jens Stoltenberg says the newly expanded alliance will make the world stronger. And farmers were on the streets of Brussels today, just outside the EU offices of those who control farming, setting fire to tyres and blocking streets with their tractors in a protest against cheap supermarket prices. Riot police were seen firing water cannons as EU ministers arrived for meetings on the growing crisis. The farmers are demanding action from the European Union on free trade agreements, which they blame for damaging European farming. It's the latest in a series of similar protests across the bloc, with the EU already moving to weaken some of its green policies. Those are the top stories. For more detail, do sign up for GB News alerts and scan the QR code on the screen right now, or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
For a valuable legacy your family can own, gold coins will always shine bright. Rosalind Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Let's take a look then at today's markets, and the pound buying you $1.2673 and €1.1681. The price of gold is £1,600 pence per ounce, and the FTSE 100 has closed for the day today at 7,684 points.
Rosalind Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Thank you, Polly. And joining me now is the queen of primetime debating. It's Michelle Dewberry, Jubes & Co. After this, Jubes, what's on your menu?
Hello there. Well, of course, the main story in town, I want to get stuck into this Lee Anderson story. It really has divided opinion now. What do you think to Rishi Sunak's response to it? Also, what do you think to those comments that Lee Anderson made himself? I want to talk about MP security. Do all MPs need much broader and deeper security? Also, as well, to Lindsay Hoyle. I mean, he must be breathing a sigh of relief today, quite frankly, because Lee Anderson has well and truly distracted attention away from him. Of course, the SNP, they want their emergency debate again. It looks like that is not going to happen. Should it or not? There is so much I want to get into tonight. What is going on with the state of UK politics?
Yeah, that's going to be superb. And I think you got a great point there, Michelle. A lot of people are very supportive for what Lee said. But has he let the Labour Party, has he let Lindsay Hoyle off the hook by putting all of the flack onto him? Jubes & Co, 6 till 7, unmissable. All right, thank you very much. Now, moving on, still to come on today's show, as farmers' protest consumes the continent. Again, I'll be speaking to a renowned Welsh farmer on why rural communities are up in arms. The farmers are revolting. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Have a great Saturday night with me, Leo Curse, on the Saturday Night Showdown. It's a crazy world out there, so come and make fun of it with me, my panel of comedians, and a couple of people who actually know what they're talking about. This Saturday Night Showdown is your front row ticket to the clown show every Saturday, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News Breakfast. Every day from 6 a.m.
Lots of people very concerned about what's happening in the Middle East. Iran obviously denying it, but the next move from the United States, our key allies, will be absolutely key.
Absolutely right. And I think there's a lot of talk about where this could go, whether the situation could be escalated. But I think the chatter is heading in the right direction, which is about de-escalation. So if there are going to be targeted sanctions against Iran, that's already happened through expelling certain diplomats and other measures there. But you can do that without arm-to-arm combat at this stage. But I think the US will be weighing up all of its options. Anthony Blinken obviously gave a press conference in the United States yesterday to say that, there will be a response from the US, but it'll be at their time and it'll be in the way in which they think is the most appropriate. So all eyes are now on the United States as to when it makes that move.
Yeah, and it's fascinating, isn't it, how domestic politics plays so much into international politics. The States, they've got a presidential election this year. We've got a budget coming up. So all the noise, both sides. You've got Donald Trump saying, go a bit more hawkish, I suppose you could say, than President Biden. And here we've got all the generals. We've got the Secretary of State for Defence coming out saying we need conscription, we need more cash. But a lot of that is part of the sort of national narratives rather than actually looking at what's happening in Iran, isn't it?
It is. I mean, it plays into, the very uncertain times that we're living. And you're absolutely right. There'll be supporters of Donald Trump who are clearly adversaries of Joe Biden to say we must act now. It's a demonstration of showing your strength. Opponents of Biden will say that the US looks weak if it doesn't take action now against Iran, who are clearly, as we know, funding these at arm's length organisations like Hezbollah in Tehran, like the Houthis who are carrying out the attacks in the Red Sea. So Iran is responsible.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. It's 5:38. We're on the final furlong of the show and you're watching or listening to Martin Daubney on GB News. Now, concern has been raised after a group of pro-Palestine protesters disrupted a local Conservative fundraiser in Stoke-on-Trent. Reports allege that guests at the event were branded Zionists and child murderers, with the group calling for a ceasefire. Well, we're speaking to the councillor Joe Parker in a moment, but before that, let's have a look at the scenes from that night.
Shame on you!
So we've just found out that there are Zionist supporters in a local restaurant in Stoke-on-Trent. We've got the share of Stoke-on-Trent here.
So these are the guys that should be ashamed. Yeah. These are the Zionist supporting guys here. You've got no backbone, and you guys are child killers and genocidal guys, all of you.
I beg your pardon.
Yes, I know this, Doctor Lee, very well. You guys have no backbone. You are child murderers, and you are obsessive compulsive freaks controlling body. You all are part of a genocide. You are all a part of. I can point at you. Is it illegal? Take it like a man.
Push hard.
There should be
Shame on you! Shame on you!
in the video.
Shame on you! 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 Shame on you!
There's a Stoke-on-Trent, anti-Zionist, anti-Tory. Stoke-on-Trent is loud.
It's astonishing, isn't it? That's where we're at. Well, joining us now to discuss this is Staffordshire Moorland District Councillor Joe Parker. Joe, welcome to the show. We just saw scenes on screen there. Look, frankly, disgraceful. Can you tell us what happened and how it made those in attendance feel?
Thank you, Martin, for having me on the show, first of all, because I think it's really important we discuss these issues because they're not discussed enough. On Friday night, Staffordshire Conservatives held a fundraising event for Police, Fire and Crime Commissioner Ben Adams, and we were supposed to have some MPs there, and we had councillors there, and sadly, our event was disrupted by the protesters that you just showed in that video, and as I approached the event, I was quite shocked because I parked a couple of streets away because the car parking is quite limited at the event, and I saw all these aggressive-looking protesters outside, and I rang one of my colleagues inside the event to ask if it was the right venue because I was concerned about what was going on, and they said it was. So I walked in, and I had a load of people shouting my name and people shouting "shame on you" and just being really aggressive. And I walked upstairs to the event, and the police were there, and what happened was we had a group of about 4 or 5 aggressive men actually come into the venue, actually come into the event and make all sorts of threats against us, calling us war criminals and child killers. And bear in mind, we had children at the event with us, and those children had to experience and witness those men coming in and making threats. And the threats were made in the commissioner's face and in the faces of local councillors who had to try and hold these men back. And it was just absolutely awful that we had to experience this sort of thing. It was quite shocking. I've never experienced anything like it before.
And Joe, of course, all of us would support the legitimate right to protest if we don't agree with a cause. But this was coming into a private venue, a private function, and as I understand it, they were simply let in.
Yeah, unfortunately, they got into the event, and that they shouldn't have come into the event. I support the right to protest. In a free and prosperous democracy, everyone should be entitled to a point of view. But political groups should be free to hold events without fear and terror, and that includes the Conservative Party and us as local councillors and MPs. And it was totally wrong that they came and stormed our event. I don't think you'd ever find members of the Conservative Party doing it to other people's events because we don't do that. And I think it's a real shame that members of the Labour Party and other opposition parties locally haven't gone out there and condemned what's happened. I think they should condemn it. I think all political parties should condemn what happened, and I'd like to see the local Labour parties also condemn what's happened, because this is not what British democracy should look like. We shouldn't have abuse and threats, and I think it's really concerning that these sort of things are spreading across the UK, that these aggressive protests, which seem to just be spreading everywhere like wildfire, and it's just completely wrong that people are behaving in this way. I support the right to protest, but not when it's done in such an aggressive way. I mean, Martin, as a local councillor, I hold surgeries twice a month. I make it my business to attend community events, often by myself, because in Brownedge and Endon, in my council ward, I'm very proud to be visible. And I put myself at risk by doing that, but I do it because in our British democracy, we have quite a unique system where people try and make themselves local and people can access their local representatives. I don't want to see that disappear from our democracy, and events like what we had on Friday make that more possible.
And Joe, thank you for being so eloquent and forthright about what happened to you, but I want to put this point to you. Do you think these scenes on the streets of London on Wednesday night, the Big Ben projection, the mob outside of Parliament, week in, week out, the police turning a blind eye to those protests, those placards, those chants, do you think there's a gradual belief that the mob is winning and therefore they become emboldened and they end up targeting a small council event such as your own?
Yeah, I think we unfortunately are getting a situation where a small minority of very vocal extremists are going around the country trying to storm events, trying to ruin our vibrant democracy, and we cannot let them win. And I think as politicians, we've got to back the police as much as possible to clamp down on this and tackle it. And I fully support the police to do their job. And I will just say that on Friday, the police did do a professional job. They did help us to safely leave the event, and their investigations are ongoing. And I believe that 4 men have been arrested, and that has been released in a public statement. And I support the police to do their job. But we cannot, as you say, Martin, we cannot let these extremists win. We've got to fight back. We've got to make sure that we live in a democracy and that people are able to freely go about their business without fear and terror.
And yet, Joe, do you think it's increasingly feeling like the mob is winning, that we're not able to have public gatherings with full freedom unless it conforms to their ideas, and the forcible entrance into events shows that the mob is winning?
Yeah, unfortunately, that is the case. And I think it's actually really sad that we're now ending up in a situation where security is being considered for every single MP. I mean, imagine that, every single MP having to go round in secure cars, having security guards with them, when the thing that's really special about British democracy is that I can go up to my MP in the street, I can ask them a question, I can have a conversation with them down the pub. We can do all that, and I would hate for us to lose that. I love the fact that as a local councillor, I can have a surgery and someone can come and chat to me about improving a local green space and stuff that we can do together as a community. I don't want to lose that. I want us to keep that. I don't want us to be like other democracies where we have a closed shop and people can't access their local democratically elected representatives. I want us to keep that in place. And these protesters are the biggest risk we've had for years to that process.
OK, Joe Parker, Staffordshire Moorland District Council, I want to thank you for your honesty and your bravery in coming on. I know it's not easy to speak out because there is a climate of fear, and please pass on my best wishes and that of GB News to everybody in attendance, and I hope you stay safe and peaceful. Thank you for joining us, Joe Parker. Thanks for your time. Wow. OK, lots more still coming up between now and 6 o'clock. And there's been chaos in Brussels today with farmers breaking police lines to protest against EU regulations. They've been spraying manure across the streets. And I'm going to get a Welsh farmer's take on all of that next. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Patrick Christie's Tonight. Weekdays from 9 p.m.
We have let Islamist extremism into Britain, we've let it fester, and now we've let it win. Our absolutely spineless surrender merchant political top brass are rolling over while government ministers wear stab vests and quit their jobs in fear. Veteran Tory Minister Mike Freer has had death threats from Islamists as well as an alleged arson attack on his office. The motive there has still not been established. He's standing down because he doesn't want to die. I cannot emphasise how important this is. A minister of the government is quitting his job because he doesn't want to be killed by a lunatic jihadi. And our Prime Minister has said absolutely nothing. Nothing. A spokesman for Rishi Sunak said he was saddened. Is that it? Our Prime Minister should have been out on the steps of Downing Street saying that we will not be intimidated. We will not let this continue. Enough is enough. What does he do instead? He tweets about XL bullies. Yeah, fantastic. Where's Keir Starmer on this? Well, he's conducting focus groups on how to get the Muslim vote back, so he's hardly going to come out all guns blazing, is he? Ed Davey? Well, there's no way a Liberal Democrat leader would come out and admit that his ideology has helped turn Britain into a poster nation for multicultural failure. The police have let protesters, which include rabid anti-Semites, rampage around London every flipping Saturday for the last 3 months. And today, they are finally saying that they don't support some of the protests, which in the past have included a now banned terror group and people holding up anti-Jewish signs. They're saying, please don't march down Whitehall. All right, but will you do anything to stop them if they ignore you? I doubt it. I honestly cannot believe that we have sunk to the level where a serving minister stands down because of threats from extremists and our Prime Minister just doesn't feel the need to address it.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now, as you saw earlier on the show, farmers took to the streets of Brussels this afternoon, setting fire to tyres and blocking streets with their tractors in a protest against cheap supermarket prices. Riot police were seen firing water cannons as EU ministers arrived for meetings on the growing crisis. The farmers are demanding action from the European Union on free trade agreements, which they blame for damaging European farming. Well, we're now joined by Welsh farmer Gareth Wyn-Jones, a huge friend of the channel. Gareth, they're revolting, the farmers in Brussels. And what's your take? Good luck to them, Godspeed. They seem to be getting the job done.
Well, you know, I've said before, farmers are always the last people to go out and demonstrate because protest because, you know, they've got businesses to run, they've got animals to tend to, and they've got crops to grow. So to see them again in numbers out across Europe as well, they're out in Spain as well. It's it's concerning, and I hope there isn't any, you know, injuries or anybody's killed with these things, because it is getting really out of hand. We need to have demonstration, but they have to be peaceful as well, and they have to, you know, get the message over to people. But it just looks like it looks carnage out there, and it looks really, really scary. I've seen a few videos of a tractor just ploughing through a block, like a police block. So, you know, we have the right to peaceful protest, but I think we really have to as well be very careful how far we take it, because we do not want to lose the consumers and the customers backing as well, you know.
I think we can all agree, Gareth, we don't want things to get too fruity, but nevertheless, we're talking about it because polite protest hasn't worked, and they're setting fire to tyres, they're going through barricades, and they're fed up to the back teeth, Gareth, of net zero targets, having to wild between 10 and 20% of their land. They're being paid to not grow stuff, and of course, something which I know will resonate with you, Gareth, the massively thin margins being forced upon them by the big retailers who seem to hold all the cards. The net result is farmers are being screwed to the floor, and yet we keep forgetting, Gareth, no farmers means no food.
Yeah, definitely. And, you know, we want a fair price for what we're producing. You know, we need to get the message out there that we're sleepwalking into food shortages if we're not very, very careful. We've got a growing population in the world that needs to be fed sustainably, you know, regeneratively and affordably. It's not easy. there's ways and means we can do. You know, there's been protests in Wales, and all these protests have been very peaceful, very respectful, and it's worked. You know, we've had people listening. You know, hopefully we can put more pressure on Welsh Government to change some of these legislations, you know, to help us with TB, to help us with NVZs and the so-called sustainable farming scheme that wants to plant 10% trees. So, you know, we can do this, but I do feel sorry for the European farmers. They look desperate across every country.
They do. Thank you very much. We're going to have to leave it there. Gareth Wyn-Jones, Welsh farmer, great friend of the channel. Now, remember, the growing row of the alleged Islamophobic comments by Lee Anderson is rolling on and on. And the London Mayor, Sadiq Khan, has accused the former deputy chair of the Conservative Party of fuelling the fires of hatred. Well, that will be happening after this. Jubes & Co. And at 9 o'clock, an exclusive interview with that man, Lee Anderson. I've been Martin Daubney. See you tomorrow, same time, 3 o'clock.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Good evening, welcome to your latest GB News weather update with me, Annie, from the Met Office. It could be quite a cold and foggy start for some areas tomorrow morning. We'll also see some rain pushing in to the north and west. We have got high pressure dominating for the rest of the day and through the night, but we do also have this northeasterly breeze and cold air. So it will be a cold evening and a cold night, in fact, particularly where we're exposed to stronger winds across the far southeast. But many areas will see a frost developing in inland rural areas. Also, there's a risk of some mist and fog, particularly across central and southeastern areas where we have had quite a lot of rain recently. There'll be a very cold start tomorrow, where really it could be down to -3 or 4, but the far northwest frost will be more limited as some wet weather is arriving through the course of the night. That will bring a damp start to the day, particularly for northern Scotland, but that wet weather will push into parts of southern Scotland as well as North Wales, northern England too. We'll see some of that rain through Tuesday afternoon. Further south and east, it should stay largely dry, but it will be a bit of a cloudier day compared to today. The rain will sink into the southeast over the course of Tuesday night. Once it clears, though, we'll see another clear night and clear start to Wednesday, potentially some further mist and fog, but then the next batch of rain arrives from the west this time, so pushing into many western areas of the UK through the morning and then further east later on in the day. But that will pick the temperatures up a little bit, so temperatures will rise through Wednesday and Thursday before they fall again to end the week.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Britain's Newsroom, weekday mornings from 9:30.
The EU rules are trying to choke even that. And I just think, you know, I would join this protest in a heartbeat. And you are right to point out this stuff about them being right-wing. How dare they slate them as right-wing when these are real people whose livelihoods
and
are
remember,
being
a lot of people who work in the farm industry, Malone, get paid very little money.
They get paid.
Agricultural workers are very badly paid.
They get paid nothing, Pierce. And, you know, the profits... I think on Clark's Farm I read somewhere that I saw that when you sell it like a sheep's skin, it's 30 pence or something. Right. And you say, what?
Yeah.
And so you wonder how they can manage that. And I think after a year, Clarkson made a handful of pounds.
He made like 90 quid profit or something.
In a whole year working.
But Carol makes a really good point, though, doesn't she, Nikki, about this idea that we go to the supermarkets, we shop there, we eat our food, we don't often give it a thing. And the farmers have become so frustrated by this idea that they are not respected.
Absolutely. I mean, they're running what are effectively small businesses, often family businesses that are being passed down through generations. They also tend to know the land and the animals better than anyone else in those areas. You know, I'm all for green protests, you know, I'm all for climate change activism, but actually... the only way you can do that is gradually. It's exactly what we've seen with Port Talbot. You know, you can't just go in and say, you're not going to do it anymore this way. You've got to do it this way instead.
The Tata Steel thing.
Yes, exactly. You've got to do it this way instead. You know, lots of farmers are on board with protecting the planet, but they can't do it overnight. You've got to give them time.
Yeah.
So they're protesting, they're saying no farmers, no food.
When
well,
you
it
say
can't
you
get any more
support some of
obvious.
these environmental protests, you're not one of these closet supporters of Just Stop Oil, are you?
I'm not a closet supporter. I think I've been quite open about Just Stop Oil.
No.
I don't like all their methods, but I do like the message. But I do appreciate the message. Yeah, but sometimes you've got to do difficult things.
What they're asking for now, those protesters, are unrealistic. What these protesters are asking for is not unrealistic.
No.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall?
Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.